Some places remember their dead longer than they should. Crawford Notch cuts through the White Mountains of New Hampshire like a wound that never fully healed. The pass stretches nearly 6 miles between steep granite walls, a natural corridor carved by glaciers 10,000 years ago and widened by human ambition in the centuries since. Route 302 follows the old railroad grade through the notch today, carrying tourists and locals past some of the most dramatic scenery in the northeastern United States. But long before the highway, before the trains, before the grand hotels that once dotted these mountains, Crawford Notch was known for something else entirely. It was known for taking people. The most famous incident occurred on the night of August 28, 1826. Samuel Willie, his wife Polly, their 5 children, and 2 hired men, had settled in a small house at the narrowest point of the notch, operating a modest inn for travelers crossing the mountains. That summer had been unusually wet. The slopes above their home had grown saturated and unstable. When a massive landslide broke loose in the darkness, the Willie family fled their house and ran directly into the path of the debris. The slide itself split around the house, leaving the structure almost untouched. Had they stayed inside, they would have survived. Instead, all 9 bodies were eventually recovered from the rubble downstream. The house stood empty for years afterward, becoming one of America's first dark tourism destinations. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote about it, so did many others. The current Willie House site, maintained by New Hampshire State Parks, sits just off the highway near the Willie House Historical Site. The original structure is long gone, but a small interpretive area marks where it once stood. The mountains still loom on either side. The Saco River still runs cold and fast through the valley floor. And on certain nights, according to local accounts that predate the 1989 incident by decades, the notch is not as empty as it appears. The Kowalski family, Raymond, his wife Denise, and their 2 children, Michael and Sarah, were driving south through Crawford Notch on Christmas Eve, 1989, returning to their home in Manchester after visiting relatives in Vermont. Raymond, a long-haul trucker by profession, knew the route well. He had driven it dozens of times in all weather conditions. The snow that night was light but steady, reducing visibility to perhaps 100 yards. They were in no particular hurry. At approximately 8:47 p.m., according to Raymond's later statement to New Hampshire State Police, Denise asked him to slow down. She had seen something on the right side of the road near the Willie House pull-off. There were people standing in the snow. Raymond estimated there were 7 or 8 of them, arranged in a loose circle approximately 30 feet from the highway. They appeared to be dressed in old-fashioned clothing, long coats, bonnets, what looked like period-appropriate winter wear from another century. Several held what appeared to be candles. They seemed to be singing, though the car windows were closed and the family heard nothing. Michael, who was 11 at the time, later told investigators that the people were standing very still, and that the candles didn't flicker at all, even though it was snowing. Sarah, age 8, said she saw a woman in the group turn to look at the car as they passed, but that her face didn't move right. Raymond did not stop. Something about the scene, he said, felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. He accelerated gently and continued south. Denise used a payphone at a gas station in Bartlett to call state police, reporting what she described as a group of people in old costumes standing in the snow near Willie House, possibly in distress. Trooper Harold Engstrom responded to the call. He arrived at the Willie House site at 9:01 p.m., exactly 12 minutes after Raymond estimated they had passed the location. The snow had intensified slightly, but visibility remained adequate. Trooper Engstrom conducted a thorough search of the pull-off area and the surrounding roadside. He found no people, no footprints, no tire tracks other than his own. What he did find was a perfect circle of melted snow, approximately 18 feet in diameter, on the exact spot where Raymond had indicated seeing the figures. The ground within the circle was bare and dry, as if no snow had fallen there at all. At the center of the circle, partially embedded in the frozen earth, was a brass candle holder. Trooper Engstrom collected the candle holder as evidence and photographed the melted circle before the falling snow obscured it. His report, filed the following morning, described the scene in clinical terms but included a handwritten addendum that was later removed from the official file. A copy of this addendum was obtained by a Manchester Union Leader reporter in 1993 through a public records request, though the state police have never confirmed its authenticity. The addendum reportedly read, "Ground within circle was warm to the touch, snow melting at perimeter in real time during observation. No heat source visible. Candle holder base showed no soot or wax residue, appeared unused. Air temperature at scene was 22 degrees. Request additional personnel for follow-up investigation." No additional personnel were assigned. The case was classified as unfounded report. No evidence of distress or criminal activity within 72 hours. The candle holder itself was examined by a historical consultant at the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources in early 1990. Dr. Patricia Holloway, a specialist in early American decorative arts, determined that the piece was consistent with brasswork produced in the Connecticut River Valley between 1815 and 1830. The casting technique, the patina, and the slight asymmetry of the base all suggested hand manufacture from that period. What troubled Dr. Holloway was the condition. "It looked like it had been made last week," she wrote in her assessment. The brass showed virtually no oxidation, no wear patterns, no accumulated handling marks. If this piece is genuinely from the 1820s, it has been stored in conditions that essentially stopped time. The candle holder was transferred to the State Police Evidence Facility in Concord, where it remains today. It has never been displayed publicly. Requests to examine it by researchers, including a team from the University of New Hampshire's History Department in 2004, have been denied without explanation. Raymond Kowalski gave several interviews about the incident in the years following, though he grew increasingly reluctant to discuss it as time passed. In a 1992 conversation with a reporter from Yankee Magazine, he said something that was not included in the published article but was preserved in the reporter's notes, which were donated to the New Hampshire Historical Society after her death in 2011. "The thing I keep coming back to," Raymond said, "is that they weren't surprised to see us. Everyone I've ever seen on the side of the road at night, they look up when headlights hit them. They react. These people didn't react at all. They knew we were there. They just didn't care." Denise Kowalski declined all interview requests. Michael, reached by a podcast researcher in 2018, confirmed the basic details of the sighting, but added one element that had not appeared in any previous account. "There was a smell," he said, "when we passed them, just for a second. My window was cracked open about an inch because I got carsick in those days. It smelled like wet dirt, like a grave." Subsequent investigation into the incident has been limited but revealing in its gaps. The Willey House site has no official record of unusual activity on Christmas Eve, 1989, or any other date. However, a former park ranger named Donald Michaud, who worked at Crawford Notch State Park from 1978 to 1994, mentioned the Kowalski sighting in a self-published memoir about his career. The relevant passage is brief. "We knew about the Christmas carolers," Michaud wrote. "Everyone who worked the notch long enough knew. You didn't talk about it with visitors. You didn't file reports. But every few years, someone would see them. Always near Willey House, always in winter, always gone before anyone could get there." Michaud's memoir, printed in a run of 200 copies in 2001, contains no further elaboration. He died in 2009. His personal papers were reportedly destroyed per his instructions. Local indigenous oral traditions as documented by ethnographers working with the Abenaki Heritage Association, include references to Crawford Notch as a place where the mountain holds the voices of those it has taken. These accounts significantly predate European settlement of the region but have never been formally connected to the modern sightings. A 1973 academic paper by Dr. Eleanor Whitfield of Dartmouth College noted that Abenaki travelers historically avoided the Notch during winter months, though the specific reasons were described only as spiritual in nature. The 1826 landslide that killed the Willey family has been exhaustively documented, but one detail is often overlooked. When rescuers finally located the bodies, they noted that Polly Willey was found clutching a brass candle holder that was never recovered. Early accounts describe it as a family heirloom brought from Connecticut. No photograph or detailed description of that candle holder exists. It was listed in the Willey estate inventory simply as one brass candlestick, value 25 cents. The Kowalski family never drove through Crawford Notch at night again. Raymond passed away in 2014, having reportedly refused to discuss the incident for the final decade of his life. In the months before his death, he told his son Michael only one thing about that Christmas Eve. "They were waiting for someone," Raymond said. "I just don't think it was us." The melted circle Trooper Engstrom photographed has never been explained. The candle holder remains in evidence storage, unclaimed, and officially unconnected to any open case. And every winter, when the snow falls heavy on Crawford Notch and the mountains disappear into low clouds, someone drives through at night and sees something standing near the Willey House site. They never stop. Perhaps that's the only reason they make it home. Some gifts are not meant to be opened. Franconia sits in the northwestern corner of New Hampshire, a small town of roughly 1,100 people nestled in the shadow of the Franconia Range. The village itself is quiet and unremarkable. A post office, a general store, a handful of bed and breakfasts catering to hikers and leaf peepers who come to admire the White Mountains. Route 18 runs through the center of town, connecting it to the larger world beyond. But Franconia's true character lies not in what it shows visitors, but in what it has learned to keep hidden. The town's history is marked by the kind of hardship common to remote New England communities. Harsh winters that isolated families for weeks at a time, a logging industry that brought prosperity and then departed, leaving empty mill buildings and unemployed workers, and disappearances, more than the regional average, according to a 1986 study conducted by the University of New Hampshire's Rural Sociology Department. The study was never published. Its author, Dr. Margaret Lindqvist, left academia the following year and declined all subsequent interview requests until her death in 2015. The property at 14 Butterfield Lane sits at the eastern edge of Franconia, where the maintained roads give way to logging trails and the forest grows dense with hemlock and white pine. The house itself is a modest Cape Cod, built in 1923 and occupied continuously since then, though not always by the same family. The land around it slopes gently upward toward the mountains, and the nearest neighbor is nearly half a mile away. In winter, when the snow piles deep and the days grow short, the isolation becomes almost total. It was here on December 19, 1947, that a 7-year-old boy named Thomas Aldrich walked into the backyard to play and never returned. The Aldrich family had lived at 14 Butterfield Lane since 1931. Walter Aldrich worked as a surveyor for the State Highway Department. His wife, Constance, kept house and raised their 3 children, Thomas, the youngest, and his older sisters, Elizabeth and Mary. By all accounts, they were an ordinary family, living ordinary lives in a place where ordinary was the highest aspiration. The morning of December 19th was cold but clear. Thomas had received an early Christmas present from his grandmother, a hand-carved wooden train painted red with his initials T.A. etched into the underside of the locomotive. He had been carrying it everywhere for 3 days. When Constance sent him outside to play at approximately 10:15 that morning, he had the train clutched in his left hand. Constance watched him through the kitchen window for several minutes. He walked to the edge of the tree line, perhaps 40 yards from the back door, and appeared to be examining something on the ground. She turned away to tend to a pot on the stove. When she looked back less than 5 minutes later, Thomas was gone. The search that followed was extensive by 1940 standards. State police, local volunteers, and a tracking dog from the Grafton County Sheriff's Office combed the woods behind the Aldrich property for 6 days. The temperature dropped below zero on the third night. On the fourth day, searchers found the wooden train lying on a flat rock, approximately 200 yards into the forest, positioned upright as if someone had carefully placed it there. There were no footprints around it. There was no sign of Thomas. The case was never closed, but active investigation ceased by February 1948. Walter Aldrich died of a heart attack in 1953. Constance sold the house in 1959 and moved to Massachusetts, where she lived until her death in 1982. She never spoke publicly about her son's disappearance. The Brennan family purchased 14 Butterfield Lane in 1997. Gerald Brennan was a retired postal worker from Nashua. His wife, Dolores, had grown up in nearby Littleton and wanted to return to the area where she had spent her childhood. They knew about the Aldrich case. It was mentioned briefly in the disclosure documents, but they were not superstitious people. They liked the house. They liked the quiet. They moved in on a warm September afternoon and began making it their own. For 4 years, nothing unusual occurred. On the morning of December 19, 2001, exactly 54 years after Thomas Aldrich vanished, Dolores Brennan opened her front door to retrieve the newspaper and found a wrapped package sitting on the welcome mat. The package was approximately 8 inches long, 4 inches wide, and 3 inches deep. It was wrapped in what appeared to be vintage paper, a pattern of red and green Christmas trees against a cream background, and tied with a burgundy ribbon that had been dyed unevenly, suggesting hand production. There was a small tag attached to the ribbon. The tag read, "For Thomas, Merry Christmas." Dolores assumed the package had been delivered to the wrong address. She brought it inside and called the Franconia post office to report the error. The postal clerk, a woman named Harriet Vance, who had worked there for 23 years, told Dolores that no package matching that description had been processed through their facility. She suggested checking with UPS or FedEx. Neither carrier had any record of a delivery to 14 Butterfield Lane. That afternoon, Dolores mentioned the package to her neighbor, Earl Stinson, who had lived in Franconia his entire life. When she described the tag and the name on it, Earl grew quiet. He asked if he could see the package. He examined it for several minutes without speaking. "You should call the police," he finally said, "and you shouldn't open that." Grafton County Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Olafson arrived at the Brennan residence at 4:17 p.m. on December 19, 2001. His incident report, obtained through a public records request in 2014, contains several details that were never released to the media. The wrapping paper was analyzed by a forensic document examiner in Concordia. She determined that the paper stock was consistent with products manufactured by the American Greeting Card Company between 1944 and 1951. The specific tree pattern had been featured in the Sears Roebuck Christmas catalog in 1945 and 1946. It was discontinued in 1947 due to low sales. The ribbon was examined by a textile specialist at the New Hampshire Historical Society. The dye was identified as a plant-based compound using pokeweed berries, a technique common in home production during the 1930s and 40s, but almost entirely abandoned by 1955 due to the availability of cheaper synthetic alternatives. The tag was handwritten in pencil. A comparison analysis was requested but never completed. Deputy Olafson asked Dolores for permission to open the package. She consented. Included, wrapped in a layer of tissue paper that crumbled at the edges when touched, was a wooden toy train. It was painted red. On the underside of the locomotive, carved in careful letters, were the initials T.A. The discovery of the train prompted a review of the original 1947 case file. Investigators confirmed that Thomas Aldrich's grandmother had given him a hand-carved wooden train as an early Christmas present. They also confirmed that the initials on the train had been noted in the internal case documents, but had never been released to the public or the press. The detail was considered too specific, too potentially useful for identifying false confessions or hoax claims. Deputy Olafson interviewed 9 Franconia residents who had been alive in 1947. None recalled the detail about the initials. None claimed any knowledge of the package's origin. The train recovered from the Brennan doorstep was compared to the train found in the woods in 1947. The Grafton County Sheriff's Office had retained the original as evidence. The 2 trains were identical in construction, paint composition, and carving technique. The initials matched exactly, same depth, same angle, same slight irregularity in the curve of the A. They were, by every measurable standard, the same train. The problem was that the train found in 1947 had never left the evidence locker. It was still there, logged and sealed, when deputies checked on December 20th, 2001. The chain of custody was unbroken. The seal was intact. There were now 2 trains. A forensic analysis of both objects was ordered but never completed. The case file notes only that the analysis was discontinued due to procedural concerns. No further explanation is provided. Both trains were returned to evidence storage, where they remain today in separate containers. Earl Stinson died of natural causes in 2007. In his final years, he reportedly told friends that he remembered the Aldrich disappearance clearly, that he had been 12 years old at the time and had helped with the search. He also reportedly said that he had seen the package before, not in 2001 but in 1954, sitting on the Aldrich doorstep 7 years after the disappearance. Constance found it in the morning, he allegedly told a local historian in 2004. She burned it without opening it, said she knew what was inside, said she couldn't bear to look at it twice. There is no documentation of this 1954 incident. Constance Aldrich's personal papers were destroyed after her death, per her instructions. The Brennans sold 14 Butterfield Lane in 2005, and the current owners, who requested anonymity, have reported no unusual incidents. The wrapping paper, the ribbon, and the tag remain in evidence storage alongside the 2 trains. The case is officially classified as unexplained found property, rather than as a criminal matter. No charges have ever been filed. No suspects have ever been identified. But there is one final detail that appears only in Deputy Olafson's handwritten notes, never transcribed into the official report. When he first examined the package on the Brennan doorstep before bringing it inside, he noticed that the snow around it was undisturbed. No footprints approached the door. No tire tracks marked the driveway. The package sat on the mat as if it had been there since the last snowfall, which had occurred 3 days earlier. But the package was dry. The ribbon was crisp. The paper showed no signs of moisture damage. It had been placed there after the snow stopped falling, but nothing had walked through the snow. Place it. Deputy Olafson included one final observation in his notes, written in smaller handwriting at the bottom of the page. Checked weather records. Last snow ended 12:14 a.m. on December 17th. No precipitation since. Package appears to have arrived sometime in the past 48 hours. No explanation for lack of tracks. Recommend no further inquiry. He retired from the sheriff's office in 2008. When contacted by researchers in 2016, he declined to comment on the case. The trains remain in their evidence boxes, identical and impossible. And every December 19th, the current owners of 14 Butterfield Lane check their doorstep before dawn, just to be certain that nothing has returned. So far, nothing has. Some recordings were never meant to be heard. Berlin sits in the northern reaches of New Hampshire, closer to Canada than to Boston, a former mill town that once called itself the city that trees built. At its peak in the early 20th century, Berlin's paper mills employed thousands of workers who had immigrated from Quebec, Scandinavia, Ireland, and Eastern Europe. The air smelled of sulfur from the pulping process. The Androscoggin River ran brown with industrial runoff. And the churches, there were many churches, filled every Sunday with families who had come to this remote valley seeking work and finding, instead, a kind of permanent winter. St. Kieran's Catholic Church was built in 1908 to serve the growing Irish population on the east side of town. It was a modest brick structure with a single bell tower, wooden pews that could seat 200, and a confessional booth carved from local oak by a craftsman whose name has been lost to history. And for nearly 70 years, St. Kieran's baptized children, married couples, and buried the dead. It was the kind of church where everyone knew everyone, where sins were confessed and absolved in whispers, where the same families occupied the same pews for generations. The parish began to decline in the 1970s as the mills started closing. By 1983, attendance had dropped below 50 on a typical Sunday. The diocese merged St. Kieran's with a larger parish across town in 1985. The building sat empty for 30 years, its windows boarded, its bell silent, its confessional booth gathering dust in the darkness. In 2014, a nonprofit arts organization called the Northern Forest Center purchased the property with plans to convert it into a community performance space. Renovation began in the spring of 2015. It was during the demolition of the confessional booth that workers discovered a hidden compartment in the back panel. And inside it, a single reel of magnetic audio tape. The tape was stored in a cardboard sleeve with a handwritten label. The handwriting was neat, precise, and clearly masculine. It read, "Christmas Mass, 1972, Do Not Play." Project manager Diane Kowalczyk photographed the tape and the label before touching anything. She had worked in historic preservation for 18 years and knew that old buildings sometimes held secrets. But something about the warning gave her pause. She locked the tape in her office and called the diocese. No one at the Diocese of Manchester had any record of the recording. The priest who had served St. Kieran's in 1972, Father William Brennan, had died in 1989. His personal effects had been donated to Catholic charities. None of them included audio recordings of any kind. Diane waited 3 weeks for guidance from the diocese. When none came, she made a decision she would later describe as the worst mistake of my professional life. She borrowed a reel-to-reel player from the Berlin Historical Society and listened to the tape. The recording begins with ambient sound, shuffling footsteps, coughing, the creak of wooden pews. A pipe organ plays the opening bars of "O Come All Ye Faithful." The audio quality is remarkably clear for a 1972 recording, suggesting professional-grade equipment. At the 2-minute mark, a man's voice begins speaking, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The voice belongs presumably to Father William Brennan. The Mass proceeds normally for the first 11 minutes. Readings from Isaiah and the Gospel of Luke, a responsorial psalm, the standard liturgy of a Catholic Christmas Eve service. The congregation responds at the appropriate moments. Nothing appears unusual. Then Father Brennan begins his homily. "My dear friends," he says, Christmas is a time when we reflect on the gift of salvation, but it is also a time when we must speak difficult truths. Tonight, I must tell you about things that have not yet happened, things that some of you will live to see, things that others will not. Diane Kowalczyk stopped the tape at this point. She rewound it and listened again to make sure she had heard correctly. She had. Father Brennan continues for approximately 31 minutes, delivering what can only be described as a series of predictions. He speaks calmly, without emotion, as if reading from a prepared text. He mentions the closure of the James River paper mill in 1993, an event that would devastate Berlin's economy, but would not occur for another 21 years after the recording was allegedly made. He references a fire at the Coos County Courthouse in 2008 that destroyed decades of municipal records. He names a child who would be born in 1987, grow up to become Berlin's city manager, and die in a car accident on Route 16 in 2012. The child's name was Kevin Arsenault. He was indeed born in 1987, appointed city manager in 2010, and killed in a single-vehicle accident on Route 16 on March 15, 2012. His parents, Michelle and Teresa Arsenault, had not yet met in 1972. They would not marry until 1983. Diane Kowalczyk made a copy of the tape before surrendering the original to the Diocese of Manchester in June 2015. She has never publicly released the copy, but she has allowed select researchers to listen to portions of it under controlled conditions. One of those researchers, Dr. Alan Westbrook of the University of New Hampshire's History Department, provided a written assessment in 2017. The recording presents significant challenges to authentication, Dr. Westbrook wrote. The tape stock is consistent with products manufactured by 3M between 1969 and 1974. The audio characteristics suggest recording equipment commonly used in institutional settings during that period. However, the content of the homily references events that occurred between 1993 and 2012 with a specificity that defies conventional explanation. Dr. Westbrook noted that Father Brennan names 14 individuals during the course of the sermon. Of those 14, 11 have been positively identified as real people who lived in or near Berlin, New Hampshire. 9 of those 11 were not born until after 1972. 2 were alive at the time of the recording, but are referenced in context that had not yet occurred. 1 in relation to a business he would not open until 1981, another in relation to a marriage that would not take place until 1979. The Diocese of Manchester has declined all requests to comment on the tape. A spokesperson confirmed in 2016 that the original recording is in secure storage, but would not specify its location or indicate whether any analysis has been conducted. Freedom of information requests have been denied on the grounds that the diocese is a private religious organization not subject to public disclosure requirements. Former parishioners of St. Kieran's who were alive in 1972 have offered conflicting accounts. Margaret Ouellette, who attended the church from 1964 until its closure, told a local reporter in 2016 that she had no memory of anything unusual about the 1972 Christmas Mass. Her husband, Robert, who passed away in 2018, reportedly told family members a different story, that Father Brennan had given a strange sermon that Christmas Eve, that several parishioners had walked out before it concluded, and that no one had spoken of it afterward. It was like we all agreed to forget, Robert Ouellette allegedly said. Like it was easier that way. The confessional booth where the tape was found has since been dismantled. The hidden compartment, according to project manager Diane Kowalczyk, showed no signs of recent access. The wood around the panel was warped with age, the nails rusted, the dust undisturbed. If someone had placed the tape there, they had done so decades ago. Father William Brennan served St. Kieran's from 1968 until 1977, when he was transferred to a parish in Manchester. He retired in 1984 and spent his final years in a church-operated nursing facility in Nashua. According to staff who cared for him, he rarely spoke in his final months, but he was observed on several occasions sitting alone in the facility's chapel, speaking quietly as if delivering a sermon to an empty room. One staff member, a nursing assistant named Gloria Thibodeau, reported that she once asked Father Brennan what he was doing. His response, she said, was immediate and unsettling. "I'm practicing," he told her, "for the one I haven't given yet." Father Brennan died on December 24, 1989, Christmas Eve, at the age of 73. His personal effects included a handwritten journal that was turned over to the diocese. The journal has never been made public, and its contents remain unknown. The Northern Forest Center completed its renovation of St. Kieran's in 2017. The building now hosts concerts, art exhibitions, and community events. The space where the confessional once stood is now a storage closet. Diane Kowalczyk left her position with the Arts Center in 2018. She moved to Vermont and has largely avoided discussing the tape in recent years. But in a 2020 interview with a podcaster investigating unexplained phenomena in northern New England, she offered one final observation. "I've listened to that recording maybe 30 times," she said. "And there's one thing I can't get out of my head." At the end of the homily, right before the Mass resumes, Father Brennan pauses. There's this long silence, and then he says very quietly, almost like he's talking to himself, "I'm sorry. I was told to say these things. I was told you needed to know." The interviewer asked who had told him. Diane Kowalczyk was silent for a long moment. "He doesn't say," she finally answered, "but the way he says it, the way his voice changes, I don't think it was anyone in that church. I don't think it was anyone at all." The copy of the tape remains in Diane Kowalczyk's possession. The original has not been heard from since its transfer to the diocese in 2015. And every Christmas Eve, a small group of former St. Kieran's parishioners gathers in Berlin to attend midnight Mass at the merged parish across town. They sit together in the back pews. They do not speak of the tape. But when the homily begins, they listen very carefully. They are waiting to hear something they recognize. Some patterns only become visible when it is far too late. Lost River Gorge cuts through the western slopes of Kinsman Notch in New Hampshire's White Mountains, a glacial boulder cave system where the river disappears underground and reappears nearly a quarter-mile away. The gorge itself has been a tourist attraction since 1893, when local entrepreneurs first installed wooden walkways and ladders to guide visitors through the maze of granite passages. In summer, families pay admission to descend into the cool darkness, squeezing through formations with names like the Lemon Squeezer and the Hall of Ships. In winter, the attraction closes. The river freezes. The silence becomes absolute. But the trails around Lost River remain open year-round. The Kinsman Ridge Trail connects to the Appalachian Trail just north of the gorge. Smaller paths wind through the surrounding forest, leading to overlooks and abandoned logging roads that predate the National Forest designation. These trails see modest traffic in spring, summer, and fall. In winter, they are largely empty, visited only by the occasional snowshoer, cross-country skier, or hiker seeking solitude in the cold. North Woodstock, the nearest town, has a year-round population of roughly 600. It swells during ski season, with tourists heading to nearby Loon Mountain. But the village itself retains a quiet, almost forgotten quality. Main Street features a general store, a few restaurants, and the kind of small-town shops that sell handmade crafts and local maple syrup. The people who live here year-round are accustomed to the rhythms of the mountains, the sudden storms, the early darkness, the way the forest can swallow sound and light. They are also accustomed to hikers who do not return. The first documented case occurred on December 18, 2003. A 34-year-old woman named Rebecca Moreau from Burlington, Vermont, set out alone on the Kinsman Ridge Trail at Tio. Approximately 9:15 in the morning, she had signed the register at the trailhead, noting her planned route and expected return time of 3 p.m. She was an experienced hiker with proper gear for winter conditions. Rebecca Moreau never returned to her vehicle. Search and rescue teams from the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department began operations the following morning. On December 20th, searchers found her backpack approximately 2 miles from the trailhead, sitting upright against a tree as if carefully placed. Inside was her water bottle, emergency supplies, and a granola bar with a single bite taken from it. Hanging from a low branch 6 feet from the backpack was a handmade Christmas ornament. The ornament was constructed from birch bark, twine, and dried cranberries, materials that searchers initially assumed had been gathered from the surrounding forest. It was shaped like a simple star, roughly 4 inches across, with a loop of twine for hanging. There was no indication of who had made it or why it was there. Rebecca Moreau's body was never found. The investigation into her disappearance continued through the winter of 2004. During the course of that investigation, a detective from the Grafton County Sheriff's Office named Arthur Pelletier made a discovery that would not become significant until years later. He learned that Rebecca Moreau had grown up in Williston, Vermont, a small town east of Burlington. Her childhood home had bordered a cranberry bog. Her mother, interviewed as part of the investigation, mentioned that Rebecca had loved making Christmas ornaments from birch bark as a child, a tradition she had learned from her grandmother. Rebecca had never mentioned this hobby to anyone outside her immediate family. She had not made birch bark ornaments since she was 12 years old. There was no birch bark or dried cranberries in her backpack, and no evidence she had gathered any during her hike. Detective Pelletier noted the coincidence in his file, but drew no conclusions. The case went cold. The second disappearance occurred on December 22, 2005. Marcus Webb, a 41-year-old accountant from Portland, Maine, vanished while hiking a loop trail near the gorge. His car was found in the parking area the following morning. Search teams located his hiking poles approximately 1 mile from the trailhead, driven into the snow side by side as if marking a specific location. Hanging from one of the poles was a handmade ornament, this one constructed from sea glass, fishing line, and a small piece of driftwood. The materials were consistent with those found on the beaches of southern Maine, where Marcus Webb had spent his childhood summers at his grandparents' cottage in Old Orchard Beach. His sister, contacted during the investigation, confirmed that Marcus had collected sea glass as a boy and had once made ornaments from his collection as gifts for his family. He had not visited Old Orchard Beach in over 15 years. He had never spoken publicly about his childhood hobby. Marcus Webb's body was never found. Detective Pelletier, reviewing the case file, noted the similarity to the Moreau disappearance. He requested that the 2 ornaments be preserved as evidence and began compiling a list of missing persons cases in the Lost River area. Over the following 12 years, 12 more hikers would vanish during the Christmas season within a 5-mile radius of Lost River Gorge. In each case, an ornament was found at or near the victim's last known location. In each case, the ornament was constructed from materials that connected to the victim's childhood in ways that were not publicly documented. Amanda Fitzgerald, missing December 2007, ornament made from red Georgia clay and pine needles. She had grown up on a farm outside Macon. Daniel Okonkwo, missing December 2009, ornament woven from sweetgrass in a pattern traditional to the Gullah communities of coastal South Carolina. His grandmother had taught him the technique when he was 8. Elise Johansson, missing December 2011 ornament carved from soapstone in the style of Swedish Dala horses. Her family had immigrated from Mora when she was 3. The list continued. 14 victims, 14 ornaments, 14 connections to childhoods that the victims had largely left behind. Detective Arthur Pelletier retired from the Grafton County Sheriff's Office in 2013, but continued to consult on the cases unofficially. In a 2015 interview with a Boston Globe reporter investigating the disappearances, he described his frustration with the investigation. "Every lead we followed went nowhere," he said. "We checked craft stores, online retailers, anyone who might have sold these materials. Nothing. We interviewed family members, childhood friends, anyone who might have known about these hobbies. No connections between victims, no common acquaintances, no overlap in their lives whatsoever, except that they all chose to hike near Lost River during Christmas season." The reporter asked about the ornaments themselves. "That's what keeps me up at night," Pelletier admitted. "The craftsmanship is identical across all 14. Same technique, same level of skill, same way of tying the hanging loop. Whoever made these has been doing it for at least 14 years, and they know things about these people that they couldn't possibly know. Things that weren't on social media, weren't in public records, weren't anywhere except in the victims' own memories." The New Hampshire Fish and Game Department has conducted extensive searches of the area surrounding Lost River Gorge. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in 2016 revealed no buried remains. Cadaver dogs have been deployed on multiple occasions with no results. The terrain itself, a labyrinth of boulder caves, underground, streams, and dense forest, makes comprehensive searching nearly impossible. Dr. Helen Marquette, a forensic psychologist who reviewed the case files in 2018 at the request of the Grafton County Sheriff's Office, offered a profile of the potential perpetrator that raised more questions than it answered. "The level of research required to create these ornaments suggests someone with extraordinary patience and access to personal information," she wrote. "The perpetrator would need to identify potential victims in advance, investigate their backgrounds in detail, source specific materials, and construct the ornaments before the victims ever arrived at the trail. This implies surveillance, planning, and a level of intimacy with the victims' histories that borders on impossible." Dr. Marquette noted one additional detail that had not been widely reported. In 3 of the 14 cases, the ornament materials included items that were no longer commercially available. A specific type of glass bead discontinued in 1987. A variety of dried flower that had gone extinct in the wild in 1992. A brand of craft wire that had not been manufactured since 2001. "Either the perpetrator has been stockpiling materials for decades," she wrote, "or they have access to sources that we cannot explain." The Lost River Gorge area remains open to hikers. Warning signs posted at trailheads advise visitors to hike with partners and to register their planned routes. Local outfitters report a decline in winter hiking traffic since the Boston Globe article was published in 2015, though some visitors come specifically because of the notoriety. The 14 ornaments are currently held in the Grafton County Sheriff's Evidence Room, each sealed in its own clear container, arranged in chronological order on a single shelf. Deputy Sheriff Karen Fontaine, who has managed the evidence room since 2012, reported in 2019 that she conducts a weekly inventory of the ornaments. "I count them every Monday," she said. 14 ornaments, always 14, but sometimes, and I know how this sounds, sometimes they're not in the same order I left them. Sometimes the one from 2003 is at the end instead of the beginning. Sometimes they're arranged by material instead of by date. I've checked the security footage. No one goes in or out. Nothing moves, but they're different." She paused before continuing. "Last December, I came in on a Monday morning and they were arranged in a circle, all 14 laid out flat, forming a perfect ring. I didn't report it. I just put them back the way they were. I don't know what I would even say. No disappearances matching the pattern have occurred since 2017. Some investigators believe the perpetrator has died, moved away, or simply stopped. Others are less certain. Detective Pelletier, now 73, and living in a retirement community in Concord, offered his own theory during a 2020 podcast interview. 14 victims over 14 years, he said. One per year, every year, during Christmas season. Then it stops. Why? Did they finish something? Did they get what they needed? Or are they waiting for something else? The interviewer asked what he thought they might be waiting for. Pelletier was quiet for a long moment. I think about those ornaments, he finally said. How personal they are. How much love went into making them, if you can call it that. And I wonder, what if they're not trophies? What if they're gifts? What if whoever is doing this thinks they're giving these people something, returning something they lost? He shook his head slowly. And if that's true, then the question isn't why did it stop? The question is, what happens when they start giving again? The trails around Lost River Gorge will open for the winter season on December 1st. The registration book at the Kinsman Ridge trailhead has been replaced with a new one, its pages blank and waiting. 14 ornaments sit in the evidence room, arranged in a row that no one remembers setting, and somewhere perhaps someone is already gathering materials. Some guests check in, but never truly leave. The Mountain View Grand Resort rises from the rolling farmland of Whitefield, New Hampshire, like a monument to an era that refused to die quietly. Built in 1865 and expanded repeatedly over the following decades, the hotel once represented the pinnacle of White Mountains luxury, a destination for wealthy families escaping the summer heat of Boston and New York, arriving by private rail car to spend weeks amid the clean mountain air. At its peak, the resort featured over 200 guest rooms, a 9-hole golf course, a working farm that supplied its kitchens, and views stretching across the presidential range that postcards could never quite capture. The hotel's history is marked by cycles of prosperity and decline. Fires damaged portions of the structure in 1879 and 1904. The Great Depression emptied its rooms for nearly a decade. By the 1980s, the Mountain View Grand had deteriorated to the point of near collapse, its grand ballroom ceiling sagging, its famous tower wrapped in scaffolding that would remain in place for 15 years. The resort was purchased and restored in the early 2000s, reopening in 2002 as a modern luxury destination that retained its Victorian character. During the restoration, workers discovered numerous artifacts from the hotel's long history: vintage furniture, forgotten luggage, photographs of guests whose names had been lost to time. Most of these items were cataloged and either incorporated into the hotel's decor or donated to the Whitefield Historical Society. But one item was handled differently. The registry was found in a locked storage room in the hotel's basement, inside a steamer trunk that bore no identification markings. It was a standard guest register of the type used by hotels in the early 20th century, a leather-bound ledger with columns for date, guest name, home address, room, number, and special requests. The entries began in January 1923 and ended abruptly in March of the same year. The final 30 pages were blank. Most of the entries were unremarkable, names and addresses from across New England, businessmen, and families passing through on their way to other destinations. But the entry for December 25, 1923 was different. The guest had signed in as E. Winter. No first name, no home address, no indication of origin. In the column for room number, someone had written 714, a room that, according to the hotel's original floor plans, did not exist. The Mountain View Grand's top floor contained rooms 701 through 712. There was no room 714. In the column for special requests, a single sentence had been written in handwriting that did not match the signature Accommodations for 7. Do not disturb until sunrise. The registry was examined by Dr. Caroline Ashworth, a historian, specializing in New England hospitality industry records, in 2004. Her assessment, included in a report prepared for the hotel's archives, noted several anomalies. The entry for December 25th appears to have been written with a different pen than the surrounding entries, she wrote. The ink composition is consistent with formulations used in the 1880s, not the 1920s. Additionally, the paper beneath this specific entry shows unusual degradation, a discoloration pattern that suggests exposure to moisture, though no other entries on the same page display similar damage. Dr. Ashworth attempted to trace the name E. Winter through census records, immigration documents, and other historical databases. She found no individual matching that name in New Hampshire during the 1920s. She did, however, find a reference in the hotel's own records, a handwritten note in the margins of an 1891 maintenance log that read, E. Winter, do not assign room, per Mr. Dodge's instructions. Henry Dodge had served as the Mountain View Grand's general manager from 1888 to 1894. He died of influenza in 1918. His personal papers, donated to the New Hampshire Historical Society, contain no further reference to E. Winter or any explanation for the instruction. Former employees of the Mountain View Grand, interviewed during the restoration process, provided accounts that complicated the historical record further. Margaret Bowman, who had worked as a housekeeper at the hotel from 1947 to 1963, recalled a story that had circulated among the staff during her tenure. They said there was a room that didn't exist, she told an oral historian in 2003. 7th floor, end of the hall, past where the hallway was supposed to stop. The old-timer said you could see the door sometimes, late at night, if you weren't looking directly at it. They said a woman had checked in there once on Christmas and asked for extra beds, 7 beds for one guest. And in the morning, the room was empty, but all the beds had been used. Margaret Bowman had never seen the room herself. She had never met anyone who claimed to have seen it. But she remembered the way the older housekeepers avoided the 7th floor on Christmas Day. They wouldn't go up there, she said. Not on the 25th. They said the footprints would still be wet. The footprints are mentioned in multiple accounts, though the details vary. Some versions describe 7 sets of adult footprints leading from the non-existent room to a window at the end of the hall. Others describe smaller prints, child-sized, arranged in a single file line. All versions agree on 2 points. The footprints were wet, as if someone had walked through snow, and they ended at a window 3 stories above the ground with no fire escape, no ledge, no possible means of descent. The window in question, if it corresponds to the location described in these accounts, would overlook the hotel's east lawn, where the original carriage house once stood. The carriage house burned in the 1879 fire. 7 people died in that fire, according to newspaper accounts from the time. Their names were never published. Current hotel management has declined to comment on the registry or the accounts of former employees. A spokesperson, responding to inquiries in 2019, stated only that the Mountain View Grand has a rich history spanning more than 150 years, and, like any historic property, it has accumulated its share of local legends. We do not comment on specific artifacts or alleged paranormal activity. The registry itself is no longer on hotel property. According to Dr. Ashworth's 2004 report, it was transferred to a secure storage facility operated by the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources following her initial examination. Requests to view the registry have been denied since 2006, when the division implemented new access restrictions for items deemed historically sensitive. A former employee of the storage facility, speaking on condition of anonymity in 2018, provided details that have not been independently verified. I worked there for 11 years, he said. I know what's in those archives. The registry from the Mountain View Grand is kept separate from everything else. It has its own cabinet, its own climate control, its own access log, and every December someone from the state comes to check on it, not to examine it, just to check that it's still there. He paused before continuing. I looked at the access log once. The last person to actually open that registry was Dr. Ashworth in 2004. But the log shows activity every December 25th since then. The cabinet is opened at exactly midnight. It's closed at exactly 12:00. 7 minutes every year. The log records it as routine inspection, but there's never a name attached. No signature, no employee ID. The former employee was asked if he had ever been present during one of these inspections. I worked the overnight shift for 3 years, he said. I was always scheduled off on Christmas Eve. Everyone was. The whole facility closes at 6 p.m. on the 24th and doesn't reopen until the 26th. I asked my supervisor about it once. She said it had always been that way, said some things were better left alone. Dr. Carolyn Ashworth retired from academic work in 2012. In a 2016 interview with a researcher investigating unexplained historical documents, she discussed the Mountain View Grand Registry for what she said would be the final time. I've examined thousands of historical documents in my career, she said. Guest registers, ship manifests, census records, personal diaries. I've seen forgeries. I've seen hoaxes. I've seen documents that were genuinely inexplicable. The Mountain View Grand Registry is the only one I refuse to keep working on. The researcher asked why. Because of what I found in the margins, Dr. Ashworth said. On the page after the E. Winter entry, someone had written something very faint, in pencil, almost invisible, unless you knew to look for it. I enhanced the image. I spent 3 weeks trying to decipher it. She fell silent for a moment. It was a list of names, 7 names, and at the bottom, in the same handwriting as the special request, someone had written, "They are coming back. They always come back. Prepare the room." Dr. Ashworth confirmed that she had reported her findings to the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources before her access was revoked. She did not retain copies of her enhanced images. She did not remember all 7 names, but she remembered one. The last name on the list, she said. It was Ashworth. My family has been in New Hampshire for 6 generations. I checked the records. I had an ancestor who worked at the Mountain View Grand in 1879, a chambermaid. She died in the carriage house fire. Her first name was Carolyn. Dr. Ashworth has not visited the Mountain View Grand since 2004. She has not discussed the registry publicly since the 2016 interview. When contacted for this account, she responded with a single sentence. I've said everything I intend to say. Some doors should stay closed. The Mountain View Grand Resort remains open to guests year-round. Room 714 does not appear in the reservation system. The 7th floor hallway ends at room 712, exactly as the original floor plans indicate. But housekeeping staff, according to accounts that management neither confirms nor denies, still avoid the 7th floor on Christmas morning. They say the carpet at the end of the hall is sometimes damp when they arrive. They say the patio window overlooking the east lawn is sometimes found open despite being painted shut in 1987. And they say that if you look at the guest registry in the hotel's lobby, a replica installed during the restoration, you will find the entry for December 25, 1923, exactly as it appeared in the original. E. Winter, room 714, accommodations for 7. The replica was created in 2002, based on photographs of the original registry taken during Dr. Ashworth's examination. The entry for December 25th was not visible in those photographs. It should not exist in the replica, but it does, and every year on Christmas morning, the front desk staff reports that the entry is slightly darker than it was the day before, as if someone has been tracing over it, letter by letter, keeping the reservation alive. Some offerings are made to something older than faith. Pawtuckaway State Park sprawls across 5,000 acres of southeastern New Hampshire, a landscape of glacial erratics, dense forest, and a lake that draws swimmers and boaters during the brief summer months. The park is perhaps best known for its boulder field. Thousands of massive rocks deposited by retreating glaciers 10,000 years ago scattered across the forest floor like discarded toys of giants. Some of these boulders have names: Ring Rock, the Acropolis, Devil's Den. Devil's Den sits at the heart of the boulder field, a formation of overlapping granite slabs that create a series of shallow caves and overhangs. The name dates to colonial times, when settlers in the area reported strange sounds emanating from the rocks on certain nights, sounds they attributed to supernatural forces. Modern geologists explain these acoustics as the result of wind passing through the narrow gaps between boulders, creating resonant frequencies that can sound remarkably like voices. The explanation is rational. The unease that visitors report when standing near Devil's Den is harder to explain. The Abenaki people, who inhabited this region for thousands of years before European contact, considered the boulder field a place of spiritual significance. Oral traditions collected by ethnographers in the late 19th century describe the rocks as the remains of a battle between powerful spirits frozen in stone at the moment of their conflict. The Abenaki did not build permanent structures in the boulder field. They did not camp there. According to one account recorded in 1893, they believed that something sleeps beneath the stones, and gifts must be left so it continues to sleep. What kind of gifts? The ethnographer asked. The elder who provided the account did not answer. The first documented appearance of the nativity scene occurred on December 25, 1978. Ranger Douglas Kimball was conducting a routine patrol of the park at approximately 7:30 in the morning when he noticed something on top of Devil's Den. The boulder's flat upper surface, roughly 12 feet above the surrounding ground and accessible only by climbing, held a complete nativity scene. Mary, Joseph, the infant Jesus, 3 wise men, 2 shepherds, an angel, and 5 animals, including a donkey, cow, sheep, and 2 doves. Ranger Kimball photographed the scene before climbing up to examine it more closely. The figures were carved from wood, hemlock, according to later analysis, with a level of craftsmanship that suggested significant skill and time investment. Each figure stood between 8 and 14 inches tall. The human figures wore clothing made from fabric scraps, cotton, wool, denim, sewn crudely but securely to the wooden forms. The faces were carved with simple features, shallow depressions for eyes, a raised ridge for the nose, a thin, horizontal line for the mouth. The infant Jesus figure was different. Its face had no features at all, just a smooth, blank oval of pale wood. Ranger Kimball reported the discovery to park headquarters and contacted the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office to report possible trespassing. Deputies who arrived later that morning confirmed that there were no footprints in the snow surrounding Devil's Den, despite a fresh accumulation of approximately 4 inches overnight. The only tracks visible were Ranger Kimball's own. The nativity figures were collected as evidence and stored at the park's maintenance facility. An investigation into their origin produced no leads. No local craftspeople recognized the woodworking style. No fabric stores reported unusual purchases. No one came forward to claim responsibility. The following Christmas morning, a new nativity scene appeared on Devil's Den. The figures were nearly identical to the previous years. Same size, same wood, same blank face, on the infant. But the clothing was different. Deputies who examined the fabric scraps noted that several pieces matched descriptions of items reported stolen from clotheslines in nearby Raymond and Nottingham during the fall of 1979. The pattern has repeated every year since. Eleanor Whitmore served as Pawtuckaway's head ranger from 1986 to 2004. In a 2009 interview with a researcher documenting New Hampshire folklore, she described her experience with the annual phenomenon. "By my third year, I stopped being surprised," she said. "Christmas morning, 7 a.m., there it is. Same spot, same arrangement, same figures. The only thing that changes is the clothing. Every year, different fabric. Every year, we check the missing property reports from the surrounding towns. Every year, something matches." Whitmore kept an informal log of the clothing identifications during her tenure. In 1988, the Mary figure wore a piece of blue gingham that matched a tablecloth reported missing from a home in Deerfield. In 1993, one of the shepherds wore a strip of orange hunting vest that matched one stolen from a truck in Candia. In 2001, the angel's wings were fashioned from a white cotton bedsheet that had disappeared from a laundromat in Epping 6 weeks earlier. "The distances varied," Whitmore said. "Sometimes the fabric came from 10 miles away, sometimes 30, but always from towns within what I started to think of as a radius, always from that same circle around the park." She paused before continuing. "I plotted it on a map once, all the locations where fabric was taken over a 15-year period. They formed an almost perfect ring around Devil's Den. Every theft was exactly the same distance from that boulder, 18.3 miles. I measured it myself." Whitmore's map has not been preserved. She reportedly destroyed it in 2003, shortly before her retirement. The woodworking techniques used to create the figures have been analyzed on 3 separate occasions. In 1984, a professor of material culture from the University of New Hampshire examined several figures at the request of the State Parks Department. His report noted that the tool marks were consistent with hand planes, draw knives, and chisels of designs common in the 18th and early 19th centuries, tools that had largely been replaced by power equipment by the mid-20th century. "The carver is using techniques that haven't been widely practiced in over 100 years," he wrote. "Either we're dealing with an extremely dedicated traditionalist, or these figures are much older than they appear." Wood dating analysis conducted in 1991 complicated this conclusion. The hemlock used in the figures tested that year showed growth rings consistent with trees that had been felled within the previous 3 to 5 years. The techniques were antique. The materials were modern. A second analysis in 2007 produced identical results. So did a third in 2016. Former park and employees have reported additional details that do not appear in official documentation. Martin Carteret, who worked as a maintenance supervisor at Pawtuckaway from 1992 to 2008, described an incident from Christmas morning, 1997. "I was the first one there that year," he said. "Got to Devil's Den just as the sun was coming up. The nativity was already in place, same as always. But I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The snow on top of the boulder, where the figures were arranged, it wasn't just undisturbed. It was warm. I put my hand down next to the Mary figure, and the stone was warm to the touch, not hot, just warm, like something had been lying on it all night." Carteret also reported that the faceless infant figure was positioned differently than in previous years. "Usually it's in the center, in the manger, where you'd expect," he said. "That year it was at the edge of the boulder, almost at the drop-off, like it was trying to leave, like it was looking at something in the trees." When asked what he thought it might have been looking at, Carteret shook his head. "I didn't look," he said. "I learned a long time ago not to look too hard at anything in that boulder field. Some things don't want to be seen." The annual collection of the nativity figures ceased in 2012, following a policy change by the New Hampshire Division of Parks and Recreation. According to a memo obtained through a public records request, the figures were to be documented, photographed, and left in place until natural deterioration occurs. The memo provided no explanation for the change. Rangers who have worked at Pawtuckaway since 2012 report that the figures left on Devil's Den do not deteriorate. Snow falls on them. Rain soaks them. Summer sun bleaches the fabric, but the wood does not rot. The carvings do not weather. Figures left in place in 2012 remained intact when checked in 2019. 7 years of exposure with no visible damage. "It's like the boulder is preserving them," said one ranger who requested anonymity, "or like something wants them preserved." The most recent documentation of the phenomenon occurred on December 25, 2023. A hiker who entered the park before dawn, against regulations, photographed the nativity scene as it was being arranged. The photographs, posted briefly to a social media account before being deleted, showed the figures already in position on Devil's Den. But they also showed something else, a series of depressions in the snow leading away from the boulder, heading deeper into the forest. The depressions were not footprints. They were too large, too irregular, too deep. They looked, according to one commenter who saved screenshots before the post was removed, like something heavy was being dragged. The hiker who took the photographs has not responded to interview requests. Her social media accounts were deactivated on December 26, 2023. Park records show no vehicles registered to her name entering Pawtuckaway that morning. The New Hampshire Division of Parks and Recreation has declined to comment on the photographs or the identity of the hiker. Pawtuckaway State Park remains open year-round, though winter access is limited to hiking trails. The boulder field is accessible on foot, but signage warns visitors to stay off the rocks due to the danger of falling. Devil's Den is not specifically mentioned. Rangers still conduct patrols on Christmas morning. They still photograph what they find. They still check the missing property reports from surrounding towns. And every year, the clothing matches. Every year, the infant has no face. Every year, the snow is undisturbed and the stone is warm, and something has come and gone without leaving tracks. The Abenaki elder who spoke to the ethnographer in 1893 was asked one final question before the interview ended. If something sleeps beneath the stones, he was asked, what would happen if it woke? The elder's response was recorded but crossed out in the original document, as if someone had decided it should not be preserved. A 1967 examination of the manuscript using ultraviolet light revealed the deleted text. "It does not sleep," the elder had said. "It waits. And every winter it opens one eye to see if the gifts are still coming. If they stop, it will open both." The nativity on Devil's Den has appeared without interruption for 46 years. The Rangers keep counting. Some songs were never meant to be finished. Cherry Mountain rises to an elevation of 3,573 feet in the northern White Mountains of New Hampshire, a modest peak that attracts little attention compared to its more famous neighbors. Mount Washington looms to the east. The Franconia Range dominates the western skyline. Cherry Mountain sits between them, quiet and overlooked, its summit accessible via a 4-mile trail that sees perhaps a dozen hikers on a busy summer weekend and almost none during the winter months. The town of Jefferson wraps around the mountain's northern base, a community of roughly 1,100 people who have learned to live in the shadow of larger things. The town was incorporated in 1773, named for Thomas Jefferson before he became president, and has survived the centuries through farming, logging, and the modest tourist trade that trickles through on its way to grander destinations. The people of Jefferson do not boast about their mountain. They do not promote it. Some of them do not speak of it at all. The first documented incident on Cherry Mountain occurred in 1847, when a surveyor named Hosea Barton reported hearing the voices of children singing hymns in the German tongue while conducting measurements near the summit. Barton, A methodical man whose journals reveal no tendency toward superstition noted that he searched for the source of the singing for nearly an hour before descending in failing light. He recorded the date as December 23rd. Similar accounts appear sporadically in local records throughout the following century. A hunting party in 1891, a pair of ice climbers in 1927, a forest ranger in 1953. The details vary, but certain elements remain consistent. The singing is always described as children's voices, always in German, always occurring on or near December 23rd. And in every account, the singing stops abruptly, mid-phrase, as if someone had given a signal. The 2009 incidents brought the phenomenon to broader attention for the first time. Rebecca Thornton was a 43-year-old emergency room nurse from Littleton who had hiked Cherry Mountain dozens of times over the previous decade. On December 23, 2009, she set out alone at approximately 8:30 in the morning, planning to summit via the Owl's Head Trail and return by early afternoon. The weather was cold but clear, with temperatures in the low 20s and minimal wind. At approximately 11:15, roughly half a mile from the summit, Thornton stopped to rest and drink water. That was when she heard the singing. It was unmistakably children, she told investigators 3 days later. Young children, maybe 6 to 10 years old, singing in perfect harmony. The song was Silent Night, but in German, Stille Nacht. I recognized it because my grandmother used to sing it that way at Christmas. Thornton estimated that she listened for approximately 90 seconds before the singing stopped. She described the cessation as sudden, like someone had pressed a mute button. The silence that followed was, in her words, the most complete silence I've ever experienced. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic, nothing. She also reported smelling wood smoke immediately after the singing stopped, a strong, distinct odor that lasted for perhaps 30 seconds before dissipating. Thornton searched the area for the source of the singing but found no one. She completed her hike to the summit and descended without further incident. She mentioned the experience to her husband that evening but did not report it to authorities until she learned that others had heard the same thing. Daniel Ostrowski was a 29-year-old graduate student in environmental science from the University of New Hampshire. He was conducting winter wildlife surveys on Cherry Mountain's eastern slope, approximately 2 miles from Thornton's location, when he heard what he initially believed to be a radio playing in the distance. "I thought someone had left a car running with the stereo on," he told a reporter from the Conway Daily Sun in January 2010. "But then I realized there was no road anywhere near where I was, and the music was coming from above me, from higher on the mountain." Ostrowski, who had studied German in college, recognized the song as Stille Nacht, Silent Night, in its original German lyrics. He estimated that he heard approximately 4 verses before the singing stopped mid-word. "It cut off right in the middle of Schlaf in himmlischer Ruhe," he said, right on the word himmlischer, heavenly. It just stopped on heavenly, and then there was nothing. Like Thornton, Ostrowski reported smelling wood smoke in the seconds following the silence. Unlike Thornton, he attempted to record the experience. He had been using his phone to log wildlife observations and immediately opened the voice memo application when the singing began. By the time the recording started, the singing had already stopped. But the recording was not silent. The third witness, Margaret Pellerin, was a 61-year-old retired school teacher from Berlin who had driven to Jefferson specifically to hike Cherry Mountain on December 23rd. She did not know about the mountain's history. She did not know anyone else was on the mountain that day. Pellerin was ascending the Cherry Mountain Trail on the western approach when she heard what she described as the most beautiful children's choir I have ever heard. She stopped walking and stood motionless for what she estimated as 2 to 3 minutes listening. "I was raised Catholic," she said in a 2011 interview with a local historian. I went to church every Sunday for 50 years. I've heard choirs from the Vatican, from Notre Dame, from Westminster Abbey. What I heard on that mountain was better than all of them. It was perfect. Too perfect. Pellerin reported that the singing stopped abruptly on the German word himmlischer, the same lyric identified by Ostrovsky. She reported the smell of wood smoke. She reported the profound silence. And she reported something else, a sensation of being watched from multiple directions at once. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a congregation, she said, like there were people all around me, even though I couldn't see anyone. And they were waiting for me to do something, to respond somehow. Pellerin descended the mountain without reaching the summit. She did not speak publicly about the experience until 2011, after learning about the other witnesses through a community Facebook group. The three witnesses did not know each other. They had no connection to one another prior to December 23, 2009. They were positioned at different elevations on different trails, separated by distances ranging from 1.2 to 2.7 miles. Yet their accounts aligned on every significant detail: the song, the language, the lyric where it stopped, the silence, the smoke. The New Hampshire Fish and Game Department conducted a search of Cherry Mountain on December 26, 2009, following Thornton's report. 12 volunteers and 4 search dogs covered approximately 8 square miles of terrain over 2 days. They found no evidence of any group, children or otherwise, on the mountain. They found no fire pits, no ash, no source for the wood smoke that all 3 witnesses had reported. What they did find was a clearing approximately 3/4 of a mile from the summit, roughly equidistant from all 3 witness locations. The clearing was circular, approximately 40 feet in diameter, and showed no vegetation despite being surrounded by dense spruce forest. Soil samples taken from the clearing revealed elevated levels of carbon consistent with repeated burning, though no visible ash or charred wood was present. The soil looked like it had been baked, said Theodore Marchetti, a fish and game conservation officer who participated in the search. Not recently. The carbon penetration suggested burning over a long period, maybe decades, but there was nothing on the surface. No stones arranged for a fire ring, no scorched trees at the edges, just this perfect circle of dead soil. Marchetti also noted that the search dogs behaved unusually in the clearing. They wouldn't enter it, he said. All 4 dogs stopped at the perimeter and refused to go further. One of them started whimpering. Another tried to run back down the mountain. I've worked with these animals for 15 years. I've never seen them react to anything like that. The recording made by Daniel Ostrowski was analyzed by Dr. Yuki Sakamoto, an acoustic researcher at Dartmouth College, in March 2010. Dr. Sakamoto's findings were never officially published, but her preliminary notes were obtained by a researcher in 2017. The audible portion of the recording contains no anomalous sounds, she wrote. Background noise consistent with a winter forest environment, occasional rustling from the subject's movement, nothing else. However, spectral analysis of the subaudible frequency range revealed something unexpected. Dr. Sakamoto identified a series of low-frequency oscillations in the recording, sounds below the threshold of human hearing, between 8 and 14 hertz. When these frequencies were pitch shifted into the audible range, they revealed what she described as patterned vocalizations consistent with human speech or song. The rhythmic structure matches the cadence of the German lyrics to Stille Nacht, she wrote. The pattern repeats several times before terminating abruptly. If these are voices, they are singing at a frequency that human beings cannot naturally produce. Dr. Sakamoto recommended further analysis, but withdrew from the project in April 2010. Her preliminary notes end with a handwritten addendum. Further analysis suspended at subject's request. Ostrowski does not want to know. Neither do I. Local historians have attempted to trace the origin of the phenomenon to specific events in Jefferson's past. The most commonly cited theory involves a group of German-speaking settlers who established a small community on Cherry Mountain's lower slopes in the early 1830s. The community, known locally as the Bergheim Settlement, consisted of approximately 30 families who had emigrated from Bavaria to escape religious persecution. The settlement appears in town records until December 1837, when all references to it abruptly cease. No explanation is provided. No death records exist. No relocation documentation has been found. The families simply vanished from the historical record as if they had never existed. A local legend, recorded in a 1912 pamphlet by a Jefferson historian named Amos Whitcomb, claims that the Bergheim settlers held a Christmas Eve service in 1837 that ended in tragedy. The story passed down among the old families, Whitcomb wrote, holds that a fire consumed the settlement's church during the midnight service, killing all who had gathered within. But no ruins have ever been found, and no bodies were ever recovered. The mountain keeps its secrets. Whitcomb's pamphlet was printed in a run of 50 copies. Only 3 are known to survive. One is held by the Jefferson Historical Society. The location of the other 2 is unknown. Rebecca Thornton, Daniel Ostrowski, and Margaret Pellerin have all declined to return to Cherry Mountain since their experiences in 2009. Thornton moved to Arizona in 2014. Ostrowski completed his doctorate and now works for a conservation organization in Oregon. Pellerin still lives in Berlin, but no longer hikes. In a 2019 email exchange with a podcast researcher, Pellerin offered a final reflection on what she had heard. "I've thought about it every day for 10 years," she wrote. "The perfection of those voices, the way they stopped mid-word. I finally realized what bothered me most. They weren't singing to God. They weren't singing to each other. They were singing to someone on the mountain, someone who was supposed to answer, someone who was supposed to finish the verse." She did not respond to follow-up questions. Cherry Mountain remains open to hikers year-round. The clearing near the summit has never been officially marked on trail maps. The Jefferson Historical Society does not include Cherry Mountain in its promotional materials for the region. And every December 23rd, the mountain is empty. The trails show no footprints. The parking areas hold no cars. The people of Jefferson know better than to climb on that day. They have learned that some invitations are best left unanswered. Some songs are best left unfinished. Some messages arrive before they are sent. Dixville Notch is not a town in any conventional sense. It is a place. A narrow mountain pass in the northernmost reaches of New Hampshire, closer to Quebec than to any significant American population center. The notch itself cuts through the rugged terrain like a wound, a gap in the mountains that early settlers used to cross between the Connecticut River Valley and the wilderness beyond. At its narrowest point, the pass is barely wide enough for a 2-lane road. For most of the 20th century, Dixville Notch was known for exactly one thing: being the first place in the nation to report its presidential election results. The handful of registered voters who lived there would gather at midnight on Election Day, cast their ballots, and announce the results to waiting media within minutes. The tradition began in 1960 and continued for decades, a quadrennial ritual that briefly placed this remote notch at the center of American political attention. But between elections, Dixville Notch was simply empty. The Balsam's Grand Resort Hotel, which had operated since 1866, dominated the landscape, a massive Victorian structure that could accommodate 400 guests but often held far fewer. The permanent population fluctuated between 8 and 12 people, most of them employees of the hotel or the small businesses that served it. In winter, when the resort scaled back operations, the population sometimes dropped to single digits. In 1991, the postmaster of Dixville Notch was a woman named Vera Ouellette. She had held the position since 1978, operating the smallest post office in New Hampshire from a converted storage room in the back of the general store. The job required perhaps 10 hours of work per week. Most days, Vera processed fewer than a dozen pieces of mail. December 23, 1991, was unremarkable in every way except one. Among the usual assortment of Christmas cards, catalogs, and utility bills, Vera found an envelope that did not belong. The envelope was addressed in neat, handwritten block letters to the last person awake on Christmas, Dixville, Notch, NH 03576. There was no return address. The postmark, stamped clearly in black ink, read Concord, NH, followed by a date, December 25, 2020, 29 years in the future. Vera Ouellette assumed the postmark was a misprint. Sorting machines occasionally produced errors, smeared ink, incomplete stamps, illegible dates. A date that hadn't happened yet was unusual, but not impossible to explain as a mechanical malfunction. She set the envelope aside and continued processing the day's mail. That evening, at home in her small apartment above the general store, Vera opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph printed on standard 4x6 glossy paper. The image showed a kitchen, her kitchen, though it took her a moment to recognize it. The angle was strange, low and slightly tilted, as if the camera had been positioned on a bottom shelf. The perspective was wrong in a way that made her uncomfortable before she understood why. The photograph had been taken from inside her refrigerator. The refrigerator door was open in the image, framing the shot. Through the gap, Vera could see her kitchen table, her chairs, her curtains, her calendar on the wall, and sitting at the table alone, her back to the refrigerator, was a woman. The woman was Vera herself. She was wearing a red cardigan that she had received as a gift the previous Christmas. She was holding a mug, her blue ceramic mug with the chipped handle. The calendar on the wall behind her showed December 1991. The clock above the stove read 11:47 p.m. Vera Ouellette had not yet worn that red cardigan in 1991. Christmas was still 2 days away, but she recognized the scene with a certainty that made her hands shake. She knew she would spend Christmas night alone. She always did. Her husband had died in 1983. Her children lived in Massachusetts and could not make the trip. She had already declined invitations from neighbors, preferring solitude to forced celebration. And she knew with equal certainty that at 11:47 on Christmas night, she would be sitting at her kitchen table with her blue mug, wearing her red cardigan with her back to the refrigerator. She had never told anyone about this routine. There was nothing to tell. It was simply how she spent her Christmas nights. Alone, quiet, awake until midnight, because she could not bear to let the holiday end while she was sleeping. The last person awake on Christmas. Vera Ouellette contacted the Coos County Sheriff's Office the following morning. Deputy Franklin Holt drove up from Colebrook to take her statement and examine the envelope. His report, filed December 24, 1991, documented the physical evidence without offering any explanation. The envelope was standard business size, white, unremarkable. The paper was slightly heavier than typical consumer stock, suggesting commercial or institutional origin. The handwriting matched no samples in any database available to the sheriff's office. The postmark was clear and appeared genuine, showing no signs of alteration or tampering. Deputy Holt noted one additional detail in his report. The photograph showed no fingerprints other than Vera's own. No smudges, no oils, no evidence that any other person had ever touched it. The envelope and photograph were sent to the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory in Concord for analysis. The results, returned in February 1992, raised more questions than they answered. The paper used for the envelope was identified as 24-pound premium bond, consistent with products manufactured by several American paper companies. However, spectrographic analysis revealed the presence of synthetic polymers blended into the paper stock, polymers that improved durability and water resistance. The specific polymer compound identified in the sample, the lab report stated, is not currently in commercial production. Consultation with manufacturers indicates that similar formulations are in development but are not expected to reach market for approximately 25 to 30 years. The photograph paper was analyzed separately. It was identified as standard inkjet photo paper, the type produced by major electronics companies for consumer printing. The ink used was a dye-based formulation consistent with inkjet printer technology. In 1991, inkjet photo printing was in its infancy. The paper and ink quality shown in Vera's photograph exceeded anything commercially available at the time. The image resolution, color accuracy, and surface finish matched products that would not exist until the early 2000s. Vera Ouellette was interviewed multiple times over the following months. Her account never wavered. She had no explanation for how the photograph was taken. She had no explanation for how the letter had been mailed from the future. She had no explanation for any of it. "I just want to know who was in my refrigerator," she told a reporter from the union leader in March 1992. "Who opened that door? Who took that picture? Who knows how I spend my Christmas nights?" The reporter's story was never published. According to notes found in his personal papers after his death in 2014, the decision came from the paper's editor, who deemed the account too implausible for print without corroborating evidence. Vera Ouellette continued working as postmaster until her retirement in 2003. She continued spending Christmas nights alone, sitting at her kitchen table until midnight. She never opened her refrigerator door after dark on Christmas Eve again. She died in 2017 at the age of 84. Among her personal effects, her daughter found the original envelope and photograph, stored in a fireproof lockbox along with her passport, birth certificate, and marriage license. A note in Vera's handwriting was attached. "Still waiting to see if anyone claims it. Still waiting to find out who sent it. 3 more years until the postmark date. Maybe I'll finally understand." Vera Ouellette did not live to see December 25, 2020. But her daughter, Linda Bergeron, made a decision on that date that she has never publicly explained. On Christmas morning, 2020, Linda Bergeron drove from her home in Nashua to the old post office in Dixville Notch, a round trip of nearly 400 miles. The Balsams Resort had closed years earlier. The general store was shuttered. The post office had been decommissioned in 2009. Linda parked in the empty lot and walked to the building where her mother had worked for 25 years. She was carrying a letter. The contents of that letter are unknown. Linda Bergeron has refused all requests for interviews. But a hiker passing through Dixville Notch on the afternoon of December 25, 2020, reported seeing a woman standing outside the abandoned post office, holding an envelope up to the boarded window as if trying to push it through a mail slot that no longer existed. The postmark on Vera Ouellette's original letter was dated December 25, 2020. The date had finally arrived. Whether anything was sent on that date and to whom remains unknown. The photograph of Vera sitting alone in her kitchen was examined one final time in 2019 by a forensic imaging specialist named Dr. Marcus Reeves. Using digital enhancement techniques unavailable in 1992, he identified a detail that previous analysts had missed. In the reflection on the refrigerator's glass shelf, partially obscured by a carton of milk, there was a second figure visible. It appeared to be standing directly behind the camera, in the position where the photographer would have been. The figure was indistinct, blurred by the reflection's distortion, but Dr. Reeves noted that it appeared to be holding something. The object in the figure's hands is consistent in shape and size with a camera, he wrote in his analysis. However, the figure itself does not appear to be standing on the refrigerator floor. The perspective suggests it is positioned approximately 18 inches above the bottom shelf, as if floating or suspended. Dr. Reeves also noted that the figure, unlike everything else in the reflection, cast no shadow. His report was submitted to the Coos County Cold Case Archives in January 2020. It has not been reviewed since. The post office in Dixville Notch remains closed. The Balsams Resort has announced plans to reopen, repeatedly delayed by financing and construction issues. The permanent population of the Notch has dwindled to near zero, but every Christmas, according to the county road maintenance crew that plows Route 26 through the pass, a single light can be seen in the window of the old general store. The building has no electricity. The building has no occupants. The light appears at 11:47 p.m. and extinguishes at midnight. The crew has learned not to stop. They have learned not to look too closely. They have learned, like everyone else who has encountered the story of Vera Ouellette's letter, that some messages are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be received. And somewhere, perhaps, someone is still waiting to send them. Some water never forgets what it has taken. Squam Lake spreads across 6,700 acres of central New Hampshire, a body of water so clean and undeveloped that it served as the filming location for the 1981 film On Golden Pond. The lake is shallow in places, deep in others, its bottom a maze of submerged boulders and glacial debris that have claimed boats and swimmers for centuries. 5 islands dot its surface, the largest being Church Island, which takes its name from a small chapel built there in the 1880s by a wealthy summer resident who wanted a place to worship surrounded by water. The towns that border Squam, Holderness, Center Harbor, Moultonborough, Sandwich, are quiet communities where families have lived for generations. The summer population swells with tourists and seasonal residents, but the winters belong to the locals. When the lake freezes, typically by late December, it becomes a landscape of ice fishermen, snowmobilers, and the occasional cross-country skier tracing paths between the islands. And, according to accounts spanning more than 6 decades, it becomes the domain of a woman who should not be there. The first documented sighting occurred on December 26, 1961. Harold Thibodeau, a dairy farmer from Holderness, was returning home from a late-night card game at his brother's house when he noticed movement on the lake. The moon was nearly full that night, casting the frozen surface in pale blue light. From the shore near Piper Cove, Harold watched a solitary figure skating in slow, deliberate circles near Church Island. "I thought it was a girl from town at first," he told a reporter from the Laconia Evening Citizen 3 days later. "Kids sometimes sneak out to skate when their parents think they're sleeping. But the way she moved, it wasn't right. She was too smooth, too slow, like she was skating through something thicker than air." Harold estimated that he watched for approximately 10 minutes before the figure completed a final loop and glided behind Church Island, disappearing from view. He did not see her emerge on the other side. The following morning, he walked out onto the ice to examine the area where she had been skating. There were no blade marks on the surface, no scratches, no grooves, no evidence that anyone had skated there at all. Harold Thibodeau's account might have been dismissed as a trick of moonlight and imagination if not for what had happened 2 nights earlier. On Christmas Eve, 1961, a 34-year-old woman named Genevieve LaRoche went skating alone on Squam Lake. She was a native of Center Harbor, the daughter of a French-Canadian family that had settled in the region in the 1890s. By all accounts, Genevieve was an accomplished skater who had learned on the frozen ponds of her childhood and continued the practice throughout her adult life. She often skated at night, preferring the solitude and the way the moonlight transformed the ice into something otherworldly. Her husband, Robert, last saw her at approximately 10:30 p.m. on December 24th. She was wearing her red wool coat, a Christmas gift from her mother 3 years earlier, and carrying her skates over her shoulder. She told Robert she would be home by midnight. At 2:15 a.m. on Christmas morning, Robert LaRoche called the Belknap County Sheriff's Office to report his wife missing. The search began at dawn. Deputies, volunteers, and a dive team from the state police scoured the lake and its shoreline throughout Christmas Day. The ice near Church Island showed evidence of a breakthrough, a jagged hole approximately 4 feet in diameter, its edges refrozen but still visible. Genevieve's skates were found on the ice 30 feet from the hole, placed neatly side by side as if she had removed them deliberately. Her body was never recovered. Divers searched the area beneath the breakthrough for 3 days. The water temperature was measured at 33 degrees, just above freezing, and visibility was limited to a few feet in the murky depths. The bottom near Church Island drops to nearly 70 feet, and the currents created by underground springs can move objects significant distances. The search was suspended on December 28, 1961. Genevieve LaRoche was declared legally dead in 1968. Robert LaRoche moved to Massachusetts the following year and never returned to New Hampshire. He died in 1992 without ever remarrying. The sightings began almost immediately. Eleanor Prescott, who lived in a cottage overlooking Piper Cove, reported seeing a figure skating near Church Island on Christmas night, 1962. Her account matched Harold Thibodeau's in every detail: the slow, deliberate movements, the figure-8 pattern, the disappearance behind the island. Unlike Harold, Eleanor was close enough to discern the color of the skater's coat. It was red, she told the local historical society in a 1978 interview. Bright red, like arterial blood. You couldn't miss it against the white of the ice and the black of the water beyond. Eleanor Prescott watched for the skater every Christmas night for the next 31 years. She saw her 19 times. She kept a journal documenting each sighting, the time of appearance, the duration, the weather conditions, any variations in the pattern. There were no variations. The skater always appeared between 2 and 3 in the morning. She always traced the same figure-8 near Church Island's western shore. She always wore the red coat. She always vanished behind the island without reappearing. Eleanor Prescott died in 1993. Her journals were donated to the Holderness Historical Society, where they remain available for public viewing. Her final entry, dated December 26, 1992, reads, "She came again, same time, same pattern. I think she knows I watch. I think she doesn't mind." The Squam Lakes Association, which monitors water quality and ecological conditions across the lake, began noticing an anomaly in 1974. Temperature readings taken near Church Island showed a consistent discrepancy from the surrounding water. A circular area approximately 200 feet in diameter, centered on the location where Genevieve LaRoche's skates were found, registered 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the adjacent lake bed. The discrepancy persisted regardless of season. Summer readings, winter readings, measurements taken through the ice, and from boats all showed the same differential, 1.6 degrees, never more, never less. Dr. Patricia Harkness, a limnologist from Plymouth State University, conducted a comprehensive study of the anomaly in 1987. Her findings, published in a regional scientific journal, offered no definitive explanation. The thermal differential is consistent with the presence of a localized heat source on the lake bed, she wrote. However, geological surveys reveal no volcanic activity, no geothermal vents, and no underground hot springs in the affected area. The most plausible natural explanation, decomposition of organic material, would produce variable temperatures dependent on the amount and state of decomposing matter. The consistency of the 1.6 degree differential over a 13-year observation period is, frankly, inexplicable. Dr. Harkness included one additional observation in her report. The warm zone corresponded almost exactly to the figure-8 pattern described in eyewitness accounts of the skating woman. The loops of the figure 8 trace the perimeter of the thermal anomaly. The intersection point, where the two loops crossed, was centered directly over the breakthrough site where Genevieve LaRoche was believed to have fallen through the ice. It is as if, Dr. Harkness wrote in a footnote that was removed before publication but preserved in her personal papers, the water is remembering something, holding on to a warmth that should have dissipated decades ago. Ice fishermen who frequent Squam Lake have developed an informal protocol regarding the warm zone near Church Island. They do not fish there on Christmas Eve or Christmas night. They do not position their shanties within sight of the western shore. They do not speak of these precautions to outsiders, but among themselves, the understanding is absolute. Gerald Boudreau, who has fished Squam Lake for 47 years, broke the protocol once. "It was Christmas night, 1998, he said in a 2016 interview with a documentary filmmaker investigating New England folklore. "My buddy and I were after some late-season perch, and we set up maybe 100 yards from the island, close enough to see it clearly in the moonlight." Gerald paused before continuing. "She came out from behind the island around 2:20, just glided out onto the open ice like she'd been there all along, red coat, dark hair, moving in that figure 8, over and over. We watched for maybe 5 minutes, neither of us saying a word. Then she stopped." He fell silent again. "She stopped right in the middle of the ice, right where the loops cross. And she turned to look at us. I couldn't see her face, too far away, too dark, but I knew she was looking at us. And then she raised one arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed. Not at us, past us, at something behind us. Gerald and his companion turned to look. There was nothing there but the dark shoreline and the trees beyond. When we turned back, she was gone, but the ice where she'd been standing, it was glowing. A faint blue light, like something was shining up from underneath. We packed up our gear and got off that lake as fast as we could. Haven't fished on Christmas since." The blue light has been reported by other witnesses, though less frequently than the skating figure herself. A kayaker in 2004 observed a pale luminescence beneath the surface near Church Island on a summer evening. A drone operator in 2019 captured footage that appeared to show a circular pattern of light under the ice, though the video quality was too poor for definitive analysis. The Belknap County Sheriff's Office has no official position on the sightings. A spokesperson, responding to inquiries in 2020, stated only that the department does not investigate reports of paranormal activity and that no criminal matter related to the LaRoche drowning remains open. The dive team that searched for Genevieve LaRoche in 1961 included a young deputy named William Fournier. He was 23 years old at the time, newly certified in cold water recovery operations. He made 11 dives over 3 days, searching the murky depths near Church Island until hypothermia forced him to stop. William Fournier served with the Belknap County Sheriff's Office for 38 years, retiring in 1999. He refused to discuss the LaRoche case throughout his career, but in 2008, at the age of 70, he agreed to a single interview with a graduate student researching unsolved missing persons cases in New Hampshire. "I found something down there," he said. "On the second day, about 60 feet down, wedged between 2 boulders. It was a shoe, a woman's skating shoe, the old-fashioned kind with the blade attached. The leather was already starting to deteriorate, but you could see it had been red once, bright red." The interviewer asked if the shoe had been logged as evidence. "I brought it up," Fournier said, "handed it to my sergeant on the ice. He looked at it for a long time, then he looked at me, and he said, 'Put it back.' Just like that, 'Put it back.'" Fournier complied. He made 9 more dives. He never saw the shoe again. It was never mentioned in any official report. "I've thought about it every day since," he said. "Why he told me to put it back, what he knew that I didn't. I think maybe he understood something about that lake, something about what it holds and what it won't let go. William Fournier died in 2012. His interview was never published. Squam Lake freezes every winter, as it has for millennia. The ice near Church Island forms thick and solid, safe for walking, safe for fishing, safe for everything except skating on Christmas night. The locals know better. They know that somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the moon is bright and the wind is still, a woman in a red coat will glide out from behind Church Island and trace her endless figure 8 on ice that should not support her weight. They know that the water beneath her path runs warm, 1.6 degrees warmer than it should be, as if something down there is still generating heat. And they know that Genevieve LaRoche went skating on Christmas Eve, 1961, and never came home, but perhaps in some way that no one can explain, she never stopped skating. She is still out there tracing her pattern in the dark, waiting for something or someone that never arrives. The lake remembers, the lake keeps her warm, and the lake, it seems, will never let her go. Some broadcasts were recorded but never meant to be seen. WMUR-TV has served New Hampshire since 1954, the state's only major network affiliate and a fixture of local broadcasting for nearly 7 decades. The station's studios sit on South Commercial Street in Manchester, a low-slung building that belies the reach of its signal, a reach that extends across the state and into portions of Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. For generations of New Hampshire residents, WMUR has been the source of news, weather, and community programming that larger networks cannot provide. The station's archives occupy a climate-controlled facility in the basement of the main building, row upon row of shelving containing thousands of tapes, films, and digital files spanning the station's history. Most of this material consists of news broadcasts, local advertisements, and public affairs programming, the mundane record of a regional television station doing its job year after year. Periodically, the archives undergo digitization projects, transferring aging analog formats to modern digital storage before the original media degrades beyond recovery. In September 2012, a technician named Daniel Provencher was assigned to digitize a collection of VHS tapes from the 1980s. The work was tedious but straightforward. Load a tape, verify its contents, transfer the signal to a digital file, label the file, move on. Daniel had processed several hundred tapes over the preceding months without incident. The tape that would later be designated Archive Anomaly 1985 12X was unlabeled. This was not unusual. Labels fell off, faded, or were never applied in the first place. Daniel loaded the tape into a professional-grade VCR and began the playback. The footage appeared to be a standard Yule log broadcast, a continuous shot of a fireplace with burning logs accompanied by Christmas music. This type of programming was common during the holiday season, particularly in the 1970s and 80s, when stations would air the footage overnight or during gaps in regular scheduling. The image was steady, the fire crackling pleasantly, the music a mix of traditional carols performed by what sounded like a local choir. Daniel let the tape run while he processed paperwork for other materials. At the 47-minute mark, something changed. A human hand entered the frame from the right side. Daniel stopped what he was doing and watched. The hand, clearly an adult's hand, wearing what appeared to be a dark wool sleeve, reached toward the hearth and placed a white envelope on the stone surface, propping it against the fireplace screen. The hand withdrew. The envelope remained in frame, clearly visible, for the duration of the broadcast. The envelope was addressed in handwritten block letters. The address was legible, 1947 Maple Street, Manchester, NH. Daniel rewound the tape and watched the sequence again. The hand, the envelope, the address was all exactly as he had seen. He noted the time code and continued watching. The envelope remained in place for the remaining 73 minutes of the broadcast. No other anomalies occurred. The fire burned, the music played. The envelope sat on the hearth, its presence unexplained. Daniel reported the discovery to his supervisor, a woman named Karen Wojcik, who had managed the archive for 15 years. Karen reviewed the footage and confirmed Daniel's observations. She then did what any archivist would do. She attempted to identify the tape's origin and broadcast history. The tape bore no station markings, no broadcast dates, no identification of any kind. The VHS cassette itself was a standard commercial brand available in any electronics store during the mid-1980s. The recording quality was consistent with professional broadcast equipment, but the lack of station identification made attribution impossible. Karen checked the broadcast logs for December 1985. WMUR had indeed aired Yule log programming during that period, standard practice for late-night holiday broadcasting, but the logs showed no record of any broadcast matching the tape's content. The music was different, the fireplace was different, and no broadcast log mentioned anything about an envelope. The tape, according to all available evidence, had never been aired. Karen Wojcik made a decision that she would later describe as instinctive rather than rational. She researched the address on the envelope. 1847 Maple Street, Manchester, New Hampshire, was a single-family home built in 1923. The property records showed a succession of owners over the decades, ending with a family named Donovan who had purchased the home in 1979. On December 25, 1986, the house at 1847 Maple Street burned to the ground, an electrical fire according to the official report, starting in the basement and spreading rapidly through the structure's old wooden frame. 3 people died: Patrick Donovan, age 42, his wife, Maureen Donovan, age 39, and their son, Colin Donovan, age 12. The fire occurred exactly 1 year after the date stamped on the VHS tape. Karen Wojcik contacted the Manchester Fire Department to request the original investigation file. The file, she was told, had been routinely destroyed in 2003 as part of a records retention policy that purged closed cases after 17 years. No copies existed. The only documentation of the fire was a brief entry in the department's annual report for 1986, listing the address, the date, the cause, and the fatalities. Karen then attempted to locate any surviving members of the Donovan family. Patrick Donovan had a brother, Gerald, who had moved to Florida in 1988. Karen reached him by telephone in October 2012. Gerald Donovan was 71 years old and initially reluctant to discuss his brother's death. But when Karen described the tape and the envelope, his resistance crumbled. "That's not possible," he said. "That address, I've never told anyone this. No one knows except me," he explained. In November 1985, approximately 1 month before the tape's date stamp, Gerald had received a letter at his home in Nashua. The envelope was white, addressed in handwritten block letters with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a typed message: "They will burn on Christmas. You cannot save them. Do not try." Gerald had dismissed the letter as a prank or a wrong address. He had thrown it away without mentioning it to anyone. Not his brother, not the police, not anyone. "I should have said something," he told Karen. "I've thought about it every day for 26 years, but who would have believed me? A threatening letter about a fire that hadn't happened." Yet, Karen asked if Gerald remembered anything else about the letter, the postmark, the paper quality, any distinguishing features. "The handwriting," Gerald said. "I remember the handwriting. Block letters, very neat. Very precise. Like someone had taken a lot of time with it. Like they wanted to make sure it was readable." Karen described the handwriting on the envelope in the broadcast footage. Gerald was silent for a long moment. "That sounds like the same hand," he finally said. "That sounds exactly like the same hand. The tape was transferred to digital format and secured in a restricted section of the WMUR archive. Karen Wojcik prepared a report documenting her findings and submitted it to the station's legal department in November 2012. The legal department's response, delivered 3 weeks later, consisted of a single directive. The tape was not to be copied, broadcast, or discussed outside the station. No explanation was provided. Karen Wojcik retired from WMUR in 2015. Before leaving, she made personal copies of her investigation notes, which she kept in a safe deposit box at a bank in Concord. She shared these notes with a journalist in 2019 on the condition that her name not be used in any publication until after her death. Karen Wojcik died on February 8, 2023, at the age of 67. Her notes contained several details that did not appear in her official report. First, Karen had attempted to identify the hand that appeared in the broadcast. She consulted with a forensic analyst who specialized in video evidence. The analyst concluded that the hand belonged to an adult male, likely between 50 and 70 years of age, based on skin texture and visible veining. The sleeve was wool, probably part of a suit jacket, in a style consistent with 1940s or 1950s fashion rather than the 1980s. Second, Karen had enhanced the audio from the tape and discovered something beneath the Christmas music. A voice, speaking at a volume just below the music's threshold, repeating the same phrase throughout the entire 2-hour broadcast, "They will burn on Christmas. You cannot save them. Do not try." The voice matched no known WMUR personnel from any era. Third, Karen had examined the envelope itself in extreme close-up. The seal was intact, the flap tucked rather than glued. But visible through the paper, when the light from the fire hit at the correct angle, was the shadow of something inside. A single sheet of paper, folded once. The letter that Gerald Donovan had received and discarded in 1985. The letter warning of a fire that would not occur for another year. The letter that was somehow placed on a hearth in a broadcast that was never aired, addressed to the home where 3 people would die on Christmas Day, 1986. The current status of Archive Anomaly 1985-12X is unknown. Following Karen Wojcik's retirement, the restricted section of the WMUR archive was reorganized, and several items were transferred to off-site storage. Official inquiries regarding the tape have been met with statements that no such material exists in the station's catalog. Daniel Provencher, the technician who discovered the tape, left WMUR in 2014 to take a position at a television station in Vermont. In a 2020 interview with a podcast investigating unexplained broadcast anomalies, he confirmed the basic details of his discovery but declined to elaborate. "I saw what I saw," he said. "A hand, an envelope, an address. I don't know what it means. I don't know how it got on that tape. I don't know why it was in our archive. All I know is that 3 people died at that address, exactly 1 year after the date on the tape, and something, knew it was going to happen." The interviewer asked if Daniel had any theories about the origin of the footage. Daniel was quiet for a long time before answering. "There's a moment in the tape right before the hand appears," he said. "The fire flickers in a way that's different from the rest of the broadcast, like there's a draft, like someone opened a door somewhere off camera. And just for a second, maybe 2 frames, 3 frames, you can see something reflected in the fireplace screen. A shape, a figure." He paused. "I enhanced those frames. I spent hours on them, and I could never quite make out what I was seeing, but it looked like someone was standing behind the camera, someone in old-fashioned clothes, someone who wasn't supposed to be there." Daniel Provencher has not discussed the tape publicly since that interview. The house at 1847 Maple Street was never rebuilt. The lot was sold in 1989 and remains undeveloped, a 1/4 acre of overgrown grass and foundation remnants in a neighborhood of well-maintained homes. Neighbors report that the lot remains, noticeably colder than the surrounding properties, even in summer, a phenomenon they attribute to the shade from adjacent trees rather than anything more unusual. On Christmas Eve, according to accounts that circulate among longtime Maple Street residents, the smell of wood smoke sometimes drifts through the neighborhood. It comes and goes without explanation, carrying no ash, leaving no trace, just the smell of something burning, just a memory of a fire that someone knew was coming, just an envelope on a hearth waiting for an address that no longer exists. Some records document things that should not exist. Sugar Hill rises gently from the western slope of the Franconia Range, a small New Hampshire town of approximately 500 residents that has remained largely unchanged since its incorporation in 1862. The village center consists of a white-steepled church, a general store, a handful of historic homes, and sweeping views of the Presidential Range to the east. In autumn, tour buses wind up the narrow roads to admire the foliage. In summer, hikers pass through on their way to more challenging terrain. In winter, Sugar Hill becomes what it has always been, quiet, isolated, and almost entirely forgotten. The town takes its name from the sugar maples that dominate its hillsides, trees that have been tapped for syrup since the colonial era. Many of the original families who settled here in the 1800s still have descendants in residence, their names appearing on mailboxes, gravestones, and town records, spanning 2 centuries. Sugar Hill is the kind of place where history is not studied but lived, where the past and present exist in uneasy proximity. The 1950 United States Census was conducted between April 1st and April 30th of that year, a massive undertaking that attempted to count every person residing in the country. In rural New Hampshire, census enumerators traveled from farm to farm, from village to village, recording the names, ages, occupations, and birthplaces of Americans who often had little contact with the federal government. The work was tedious, the pay was modest, and the conditions were frequently difficult. The enumerator assigned to Sugar Hill in 1950 was a man named Bernard Coate, a 43-year-old schoolteacher from Littleton who had taken the temporary census position to supplement his income. Bernard was known in his community as meticulous, methodical, and deeply religious, a devout Catholic who attended Mass every Sunday and kept detailed journals that he believed would one day serve as a record of his unremarkable but faithful life. Bernard Coates' census records for Sugar Hill are preserved in the National Archives, available to researchers who request the appropriate microfilm reels. The records document 67 households and 284 individuals, a complete accounting of the town's population in the spring of 1950. The entries are written in Bernard's careful handwriting, each line filled with the mundane details of rural New England life, farmers and their wives, children attending the local school, elderly widows living alone in houses their husbands had built. And then there is the entry for Lot 47, Sunset Road. The entry lists a household of 5 persons with the surname Christkind. The head of household is recorded as Heinrich Christkind, male, white, age 60. His wife is listed as Maria Christkind, female white, age 60. Their 3 children, Wilhelm, Anna, and Kaspar, are each listed as age 60, all 5 family members sharing the same birth date, December 25, 1890. The occupation column for Heinrich reads, Winter Keeper. The occupation column for Maria is blank. The children have no occupations listed. Under the column for residence 5 years ago, Bernard wrote a single word for each family member, here. The address, Lot 47, Sunset Road, does not exist. Sunset Road ends at Lot 39, where it terminates in a dead end at the edge of a maple forest. There is no Lot 40 through 49. Town records confirm that no such lots were ever surveyed, platted, or assigned. The numbers simply do not exist in Sugar Hill's property registry. The anomaly was first noticed in 1982 by a genealogist named Dorothy Whitaker, who was researching her family's Sugar Hill roots. Dorothy had ordered copies of the 1950 census records and was systematically cross-referencing them with town tax records, cemetery plots, and church registries. The Christkind family appeared in none of these sources. They had no graves, no tax assessments, no baptismal records, no marriage licenses, no death certificates. They appeared in exactly one document, Bernard Coates' census entry. Dorothy Whitaker contacted the Sugar Hill town clerk's office to inquire about the discrepancy. The clerk at the time, a woman named Helen Aldrich, who had held the position since 1963, reviewed the records and confirmed that no family named Christkind had ever resided in Sugar Hill. She also confirmed that Sunset Road had never extended beyond Lot 39. It must be a transcription error, Helen told Dorothy in a letter dated March 1983. Perhaps Mr. Coate confused Sugar Hill with another town on his route. These things happen with old census records, but Bernard Coate had not been assigned to any other town. His census route covered Sugar Hill and Sugar Hill alone. His records for the other 66 households have been verified against independent sources. They are accurate. They are complete. Only the Christkind entry has no corroboration. Dorothy Whitaker's inquiry might have ended there if she had not discovered Bernard Coates' journals. Bernard had died on December 25, 1951, Christmas Day, at the age of 44. The cause of death was recorded as heart failure, though he had no history of cardiac problems and had passed a physical examination for his teaching position just 6 months earlier. His widow, Lucille, donated his journals to the Littleton Historical Society in 1967, believing they might have value for researchers interested in mid-century New Hampshire life. The journals span from 1931 to 1951, 20 years of daily entries documenting Bernard's thoughts, prayers, and observations. Most entries are unremarkable notes about weather, school activities, church services, family dinners. But the entries from April 1950, when Bernard was conducting the census, contain passages that Dorothy Whitaker found deeply unsettling. April 14, 1950. Finished the north side of town today. Tomorrow I begin Sunset Road. Mrs. Aldrich at the clerk's office warns me that the road becomes difficult past Lot 30. I told her I would be thorough. April 15, 1950. Something strange today. Reached the end of Sunset Road, the official end, at Lot 39. But the road continued. I followed it another quarter mile through the maples, found a house I had not expected. Large, well-maintained, smoke coming from the chimney. A family of 5. They invited me inside. April 16, 1950. Cannot stop thinking about the Christkinds. They were kind to me, offered me coffee and cake, answered all my questions, but something was wrong. I cannot say what. The children, if they were children, never blinked, not once. I watched for it specifically. They did not blink. April 17, 1950. Returned to the clerk's office to verify the address. Mrs. Patterson, Helen's predecessor, had no record of Lot 47, no record of any lots past 39. Told me I must have wandered into the next township, but I know these hills. I know where Sugar Hill ends. That house was in Sugar Hill. That family was in Sugar Hill. I recorded what I saw. The journal entries become sporadic after April 1950, with long gaps between Bernard's observations. The final entry is dated December 24, 1951, Christmas Eve, the night before his death. I have seen them again, Bernard wrote, walking through town in the snow, all 5 of them dressed in black, moving toward the church. Heinrich saw me watching from my window. He tipped his hat. Maria smiled. The children, God help me, the children waved. They waved and their hands moved wrong. Too many joints, too many fingers. I am locking my doors. I am praying. Tomorrow is Christmas, December 25th, their birthday. All 5 of them, the same birthday, the same year. 60 years old in 1950. That means they were born in 1890. December 25th, 1890. But they looked exactly the same tonight as they did in April. Exactly the same. They have not aged. They have not changed. God forgive me. I recorded what I saw. I should not have recorded what I saw. Bernard Coate was found dead in his home on Christmas morning, 1951. His widow reported that he had gone to bed early on Christmas Eve, complaining of fatigue. She found him in his chair by the window facing the street, his rosary clutched in his hands. The doctor who examined him noted that Bernard's expression was peaceful, as if he had seen something beautiful in his final moments. His journal was open on the table. Beside him, the Christmas Eve entry still visible. Dorothy Whitaker attempted to locate the site Bernard described, the continuation of Sunset Road, the house in the maple forest, in 1983. She walked past Lot 39 and found nothing but trees. The road ended where the town record said it ended. There was no sign that any structure had ever stood in the forest beyond. She returned on December 25, 1983, acting on what she later described as a compulsion I could not explain. This time she found something. Approximately a quarter-mile past the end of Sunset Road, in a small clearing surrounded by ancient maples, Dorothy discovered a stone foundation. The stones were moss-covered and partially buried, suggesting great age. The foundation was rectangular, roughly the dimensions of a large farmhouse. In the center of what would have been the front yard, a single maple tree grew, younger than the surrounding forest, perhaps 60 or 70 years old. Dorothy photographed the foundation and the tree. When she had the photographs developed, only the tree was visible. The foundation did not appear in any of the images, though she had framed it carefully in every shot. She never returned to the site. She never published her research. She donated her notes to the Littleton Historical Society in 2001, where they remain filed alongside Bernard Coate's journals. The surname Christkind, or Christkind in its more common spelling, refers to the Christ child in German-speaking Christmas traditions. The Christkind is the gift-bringer in parts of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, a figure who delivers presents on Christmas Eve and is sometimes depicted as a young girl with angelic features. The archaic spelling used in Bernard's census entry, Christkind, appears in German texts from the 16th and 17th centuries, but had largely fallen out of use by the 19th century. No immigration. Records show any family named Christkind entering the United States through any port of entry at any time in recorded history. The Census Bureau has no policy regarding anomalous entries in historical records. A spokesperson, responding to a 2012 inquiry from a researcher at the University of New Hampshire, stated that errors in census records are not uncommon, particularly in rural areas where enumerators had limited resources for verification. The Bureau does not investigate or amend historical records based on subsequent research. The entry for the Christkind family remains in the official 1950 census for Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. Heinrich, Maria, Wilhelm, Anna, and Caspar, all born December 25, 1890, all permanent winter residents of an address that does not exist. Sugar Hill's current town clerk, a woman named Patricia Rowan, who has held the position since 2009, confirms that she receives occasional inquiries about the Christkind entry. She provides the same response to each inquiry. The address does not exist. No family by that name has ever been documented in town records, and she has no explanation for Bernard Coate's entry. When asked if she has ever walked past the end of Sunset Road to look for the foundation Dorothy Whitaker described, Patricia Rowan pauses before answering. "I did once," she says, "about 6 years ago, Christmas Day, early morning, just after sunrise." She falls silent. "I found the clearing. I found the tree. I found something that might have been a foundation, though I couldn't be certain. The snow was too deep. But I also found something else. Footprints in the snow, leading away from the clearing, heading toward town. 5 sets of prints, 2 large, 3 smaller. They led all the way to the church, to the front steps, and then they stopped. Patricia Rowan has not walked past the end of Sunset Road since. The maple tree in the clearing continues to grow. The foundation, if it exists, continues to decay beneath the forest floor. And somewhere in the National Archives, Bernard Coates' careful handwriting documents a family that no one can find, living at an address that no one can locate, celebrating a birthday that falls on the same day Bernard himself took his final breath. December 25th, the birthday of the Christ child, the day the Christkind's came to Sugar Hill and perhaps never left. Some echoes come from places that no longer exist. The Connecticut River forms the boundary between New Hampshire and Vermont for nearly 270 miles, a winding course that has shaped the history and identity of both states since before the American Revolution. In its upper reaches, where the river narrows and the hills press close on either side, communities on opposite banks have always shared more than a border. They share churches, cemeteries, family names, and memories that do not recognize state lines. The town of Haverhill, New Hampshire, sits on the eastern bank of the Connecticut, a modest community of roughly 4,000 people spread across a landscape of farms, forests, and small villages. Directly across the river lies Newbury, Vermont, a town of similar size and character. For most of their shared history, these towns were connected by covered bridges, wooden structures that allowed farmers, merchants, and families to cross the river regardless of weather or season. The Bedell-covered bridge was the last of these connections, a 201-foot span built in 1866 to replace an earlier structure destroyed by flooding. The bridge was named for Colonel Moody Bedell, a local landowner who had donated the land for its construction. It was a magnificent example of the Haupttrust design, its latticed wooden framework capable of supporting loads that would have destroyed lesser structures. For over a century, the Bedell Bridge carried generations across the Connecticut River, its wooden planks worn smooth by countless footsteps, wagon wheels, and eventually automobiles. The bridge collapsed on September 14, 1979, during a windstorm that sent its weakened timbers tumbling into the river below. By then, the structure had been closed to vehicular traffic for years, its deterioration too advanced for safe passage. The collapse was mourned but not unexpected. What remained unexpected, what remains unexplained, is what stopped being heard after the bridge fell. The bells had first been documented in 1893, 2 years after the fire that destroyed the First Congregational Church of Newbury, Vermont, on March 17, 1891. The fire began in the early morning hours and consumed the wooden structure within minutes, leaving only a stone foundation and a handful of salvaged pews. The church's 2 bronze bells, cast in Boston in 1847, were never recovered from the ruins. They were presumed to have melted in the intense heat, their metal absorbed into the ash and debris that was later cleared from the site. But in December 1893, a farmer named Ezekiel Grout reported hearing bells ringing beneath the frozen Connecticut River as he crossed the Bedell Bridge on Christmas Eve. The account was recorded in his diary, discovered by his granddaughter in 1962, and donated to the Haverhill Historical Society. "Crossed at 11:30 on my way to midnight service," Ezekiel wrote. "River frozen solid, snow falling light. Halfway across I heard bells, church bells, ringing clear as morning, not from Newbury, not from Haverhill, from below, from the water under the ice. I stopped the horse and listened, 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then silence. Told Reverend Patterson after service. He said I had heard the bells of heaven calling the faithful to prayer. I said nothing more. But those were not heaven's bells. Those were the bells of First Congregational. I know their sound. I heard them ring for 40 years before the fire took them, and I heard them ring again tonight from beneath the frozen river, as clear as if no fire had ever burned. Ezekiel Grout's account might have been dismissed as the fancy of an elderly farmer on a cold Christmas Eve, but over the following 8 decades, similar reports accumulated with a consistency that defied easy explanation. Margaret Holloway, crossing the bridge in 1907, described hearing a melody of bells, muffled as if playing through deep water, yet perfectly recognizable as a hymn tune I had heard in the Newbury Church as a girl before the fire. Thomas and Ruth Emery, walking home from a Christmas Eve gathering in 1931, stopped on the bridge for nearly 15 minutes listening to what Thomas described as bells tolling in slow rhythm, the exact rhythm old Reverend Mills used to call the congregation to worship. Deputy Sheriff Warren Chambers, patrolling the bridge on Christmas Eve 1958, reported the phenomenon in an incident log that was later removed from official records but preserved in his personal papers. Bells audible from beneath the river ice. Investigated banks on both sides. No source found. Sound ceased at exactly midnight. The pattern was always the same. The bells were heard only on Christmas Eve, only between approximately 11:30 p.m. and midnight, only from the bridge itself. Those standing on the riverbanks heard nothing. Those crossing in vehicles sometimes heard nothing. But those who stopped, who stood still on the wooden planks and listened, invariably described the same phenomenon, church bells ringing from beneath the frozen river, bells whose tone and cadence matched the lost bells of First Congregational. Dr. Harriet Vance, a professor of acoustic physics at Dartmouth College, investigated the reports in 1974 at the request of the Haverhill Historical Society. Her findings, published in a regional academic journal, offered no satisfying explanation. The acoustic properties of the Connecticut River Valley could theoretically produce unusual sound propagation effects, she wrote. Cold air, frozen surfaces, and the natural amphitheater created by the surrounding hills might allow sounds to travel in unexpected ways. However, this hypothesis requires a source for the bells, church bells, that would be ringing somewhere within acoustic range on Christmas Eve. I have surveyed every church within a 20-mile radius. None ring their bells at the reported times. None possess bells matching the tonal description provided by witnesses. Dr. Vance included one additional observation that did not appear in the published version of her report. A handwritten addendum, preserved in her research files at Dartmouth, reads, "Conducted personal observation on Bridge Christmas Eve, 1974. Arrived at 11:15 p.m. At 11:32 p.m., heard bells distinctly, 2 bells in harmony, one higher, one lower, ringing in a pattern consistent with 19th century New England church practice. Sound appeared to emanate from the ice surface approximately 40 feet downstream from bridge. Duration, 27 minutes. Sound ceased abruptly at 11:59 p.m. I have no explanation. I will not be returning." The Bedell-covered bridge collapsed on September 14, 1979. The following Christmas Eve, several longtime residents of Haverhill gathered at the site where the bridge had stood, curious whether the bells would still be heard. They stood on the New Hampshire bank looking out at the dark river and the skeletal remains of the bridge pilings protruding from the ice. They heard nothing. The silence persisted in 1980, 1981, and every Christmas Eve thereafter. Whatever acoustic phenomenon had produced the bells, whatever source had generated those sounds for nearly 90 years, had stopped when the bridge fell into the river. Or so it seemed. In 2004, the Upper Valley Land Trust commissioned an underwater survey of the Connecticut River near the former bridge site, part of a broader environmental assessment of the region. Divers from a marine archaeology firm based in Burlington, Vermont, conducted the survey over 3 days in late October, documenting debris, mapping the river bottom, and assessing the ecological impact of the bridge collapse. On the second day of diving, a team member named Christopher Doucette discovered something wedged between two large rocks approximately 60 feet downstream from the former bridge location. It was a curved piece of bronze, roughly 8 inches long and 4 inches wide, with a thickness of approximately 1/4 inch. The fragment was heavily corroded on one side, but surprisingly clean on the other, as if it had been protected from the water for most of its submersion. The fragment was recovered and sent to a metallurgical laboratory in Boston for analysis. The results, delivered in January 2005, created more questions than they answered. The bronze composition was consistent with bell metal used by American foundries in the mid to late 19th century, approximately 80% copper, 20% tin, with trace amounts of silver and antimony. The casting technique suggested manufacture between 1840 and 1890. Microscopic analysis of the metal structure indicated that the fragment had once been part of a larger casting, most likely a bell weighing between 200 and 400 pounds. The corrosion pattern, however, told a different story. Bronze, submerged in fresh water, develops a characteristic patina over time, the laboratory report explained. The corrosion rate is influenced by water temperature, oxygen content, and the presence of dissolved minerals. Based on the patina thickness and composition observed on the recovered fragment, we estimate a submersion period of 18 to 24 months. The fragment, according to the metallurgical analysis, had been underwater for less than 2 years, but the composition and manufacture dated it to the 1880s. Christopher Doucette, the diver who recovered the fragment, was interviewed by a journalist researching the story in 2008. He described the moment of discovery with evident unease. "I almost missed it," he said. "It was wedged deep in the rocks, only a corner showing. When I pulled it free, I felt— this is going to sound strange— I felt like I was interrupting something, like the fragment was supposed to be there, like I was taking something that didn't belong to me." Doucette also described what happened when he brought the fragment to the surface. "As soon as it broke the water, I heard something. Just for a second. A tone, a musical note, like a bell being struck far away. My dive partner heard it too. We both looked around, trying to figure out where it came from. There was nothing. No churches nearby, no boats, nothing. Just that one note hanging in the air, and then silence." The fragment is currently held by the Haverhill Historical Society, displayed in a glass case alongside photographs of the Bedell Bridge and transcriptions of the bell accounts dating back to 1893. A placard explains the metallurgical findings without offering interpretation. The First Congregational Church of Newbury, Vermont, was rebuilt in 1894 with a new bell tower and a single bell cast in Troy, New York. That bell still rings today, its tone distinctly different from the twin bells lost in the fire. Older residents who remember hearing the original bells, or who heard their parents describe them, say the recovered fragment's estimated weight and composition match the smaller of the two lost bells almost exactly. No additional fragments have been recovered from the river despite several subsequent surveys. Divers report that the section of river bottom where the fragment was found is unusually cold, measurably colder than the surrounding water, regardless of season. No geological explanation has been offered for this temperature differential. The Bedell-covered bridge was never rebuilt. A modern concrete span now carries traffic across the Connecticut River several miles, 100 yards upstream from the original site. The bridge pilings remain visible at low water, gray and weathered, slowly being absorbed by the river that claimed them. On Christmas Eve, 2018, a group of amateur historians gathered at the Haverhill riverbank to conduct what they called a listening vigil, an attempt to determine whether the bells might still be heard from the shore. They stood in the cold for 3 hours, from 10 p.m. until 1 a.m., equipped with sensitive audio recording equipment and thermal imaging cameras. They heard nothing, but when they reviewed the audio recordings the following day, they found something the microphones had captured that human ears had missed. Beginning at 11:32 p.m. and ending at 11:59 p.m., the recordings contained a series of low-frequency oscillations, sound waves below the threshold of human hearing, vibrating at a rate consistent with large bronze bells. The pattern matched no known bell, currently in operation within 500 miles. The pattern matched, according to acoustic analysis, the harmonic signature that would be produced by 2 bronze bells cast in Boston in 1847, ringing in the traditional New England style. The bells of First Congregational, the bells that burned in 1891, the bells that rang from beneath the ice for nearly 90 years, heard only from a bridge that no longer stands. The recording has not been released to the public. The historians who made it have declined to discuss their findings beyond confirming that something was there. And every Christmas Eve, the Connecticut River flows dark and cold beneath the empty space where the Bedell Bridge once stood, carrying sounds that human ears can no longer hear toward a destination that no one has ever found. The bells are still ringing. We have simply lost the ability to listen. Some messages find their way regardless of distance. The Common Man restaurant in Ashland, New Hampshire, occupies a converted railroad station on Main Street. Its warm wooden interior and eclectic decor drawing both locals and travelers to a dining experience that feels deliberately timeless. The restaurant is part of a small New Hampshire chain founded in 1971, known for comfort food, local sourcing, and a philosophy that emphasizes community over commerce. The Ashland location opened in 1982 and has remained largely unchanged since. The same exposed beams, the same antique signs on the walls, the same sense that time moves differently within its doors. Ashland itself is a town of approximately 2,000 residents, nestled between the foothills of the White Mountains and the southern shore of Squam Lake. It is a place where families have lived for generations, where newcomers are welcomed but never quite stop being new, and where the rhythms of life follow patterns established long before anyone currently living can remember. The common man fits Ashland the way a key fits a lock, not because it was designed to, but because it grew into its place over time. Catherine Bellamy had been eating at the Common Man for 23 years. She was a high school English teacher in nearby Plymouth, a widow since 1998, and a creature of habit who found comfort in familiar places and predictable routines. Every Christmas Eve, she drove to Ashland, sat at the same corner table, ordered the pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes, and read whatever novel she was currently working through. It was her ritual, her way of marking the holiday without dwelling on everything she had lost. On December 24, 2007, Catherine arrived at the Common Man at approximately 6:30 in the evening. The restaurant was busy but not crowded, the usual mix of families celebrating and travelers passing through. She was seated at her usual table, the staff knew her by now and kept it available when they could, and opened her book, a worn paperback copy of A Christmas Carol she reread every December. The waitress who approached her table was not one Catherine recognized. The woman appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and an apron that matched the standard common man uniform. Her name tag read Noel in handwritten letters. She smiled warmly as she set down a glass of water and asked if Catherine was ready to order. "I know what I want," Catherine said. "The pot roast, please. I get it every year." Noel nodded. "I know. Mrs. Bellamy, right? You've been coming here for a long time." Catherine was mildly surprised that the waitress knew her name, but she had been a regular for over 2 decades. Word traveled among staff. She confirmed her identity and watched Noel write down the order with a fountain pen. An odd detail that Catherine would remember later, as most servers used ballpoint pens or electronic tablets. "Are you spending Christmas alone this year?" Noel asked. The question was personal in a way that restaurant staff typically avoided, but something about Noel's tone made it feel like genuine concern rather than prying. Catherine found herself answering honestly. "I have been for a while," she said. "My husband passed away 9 years ago. My daughter lives in California with her family. And my brother—" She stopped, surprised at herself for mentioning David at all. "My brother and I don't speak." Noel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "That must be hard, especially at Christmas." "It's been 11 years, Catherine said, unsure why she was sharing this with a stranger. "Some things can't be fixed." Noel was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Sometimes forgiveness is the only gift that matters, even when it comes too late." Before Catherine could respond, Noel smiled again and walked toward the kitchen. Catherine watched her go, struck by the odd intensity of the exchange, but willing to attribute it to the emotions that Christmas Eve inevitably stirred. The pot roast arrived 15 minutes later, brought by a different server, a young man Catherine recognized from previous visits. She asked him about Noel, wanting to leave a good tip for the waitress who had been so attentive. "Noel?" The server looked confused. "We don't have anyone named Noel working tonight. Are you sure that was her name?" Catherine described the woman. Dark hair, late 20s, handwritten name tag, fountain pen. The server shook his head. "That doesn't match anyone on staff," he said. "Maybe she was helping out from another location? I can check with the manager." Catherine said it wasn't important and returned to her meal. But she found herself watching the restaurant more than her book, scanning the room for the dark-haired waitress who had known her name. She did not see Noel again. When Catherine finished her dinner and asked for the check, the young server brought it in a standard leather folder. Inside was the printed bill, pot roast, coffee, apple pie that Catherine had added on impulse, and beneath it, a handwritten note on a piece of cream-colored paper. The note was written in elegant script, clearly from a fountain pen. It read, "Tell David I forgive him. N." Catherine stared at the note for a long moment. Her hands were trembling when she finally set it down. She had not mentioned David's name to anyone. She had said, "my brother," but never identified him. She had not spoken his name aloud in over a decade, not since the argument that had severed their relationship, a dispute over their mother's estate that had escalated beyond reason or repair, leaving both siblings wounded and unwilling to bend. Catherine paid her bill and left a generous tip despite her confusion. She drove home in silence, the note folded carefully in her purse, and spent Christmas Eve unable to sleep, turning the encounter over in her mind. She told herself it was a coincidence. She told herself Noel must have overheard something, misunderstood something, written a note meant for someone else. She did not believe any of these explanations. On December 27, 2007, Catherine received a phone call from the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Portland, Oregon. A deputy informed her that her brother, David Bellamy, had been killed in a single-vehicle accident on Christmas Day. His car had left the road on Interstate 84 during a snowstorm. He had died at the scene. David had listed Catherine as his emergency contact, the only emergency contact, with a note in his wallet that read, "In case of emergency, please contact my sister Catherine. Tell her I hope she forgives me." The deputy asked if Catherine had any questions. She had only one. "What time did the accident happen?" The deputy checked his notes. The collision occurred at approximately 8:45 p.m. Pacific Time. That would be 11:45 p.m. Eastern. Catherine calculated the time difference. At 11:45 p.m. Eastern Time on Christmas Day, she had been lying awake in her bed, unable to sleep, holding a note from a waitress who did not exist. The note that told her to forgive a brother who was dying 2,000 miles away. Catherine Bellamy returned to the common man on December 31st. 2007. She spoke with the restaurant's general manager, a man named Peter Delacroix, who had worked at the Ashland location since 1990. She showed him the note and described her encounter with Noel. Peter examined the note carefully. He confirmed that no one named Noel had ever worked at the Ashland location. He checked employment records going back to the restaurant's opening in 1982. The name did not appear. "The paper is strange too," he said, holding the note up to the light. "This isn't anything we stock. Our servers use standard receipt paper for notes. I don't know what this is. It feels old, heavy, like stationery from another era." He offered to keep the note, to investigate further, but Catherine declined. She had already decided she didn't want answers. Some questions, she realized, were better left unasked. Peter Delacroix shared Catherine's story with longtime staff members over the following weeks. What he learned disturbed him enough that he documented it in a personal journal he kept locked in his office. 3 other employees recalled unusual encounters on Christmas Eve, 2007. A dishwasher named Marcus Webb remembered a woman matching Noel's description entering the kitchen briefly to return a coffee cup, though kitchen access was restricted to staff. A hostess named Jennifer Anderson recalled seating a party of 4 who mentioned their server by name, Noel, though Jennifer had not assigned them that server. A bartender named Thomas Kearney reported that a woman in a server's apron had ordered a glass of water for the lady in the corner at approximately 7:15 p.m., though he had not recognized her face and could not recall seeing her again. All 3 descriptions matched: dark hair, late 20s, handwritten name tag, an old-fashioned fountain pen tucked into her apron pocket. Peter Delacroix also discovered something in the restaurant's informal archives, a collection of photographs, menus, and memorabilia that previous managers had accumulated over the years. Among them was a staff photograph from Christmas 1983, the restaurant's first full year of operation. In the back row of the photograph, barely visible behind a taller colleague, was a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The photograph's caption identified her only as Noel D., seasonal staff, December 1983. No last name, no employment records, no other photographs. Peter showed the image to Marcus, Jennifer, and Thomas separately, without telling them where it came from. All 3 identified the woman as the person they had seen on Christmas Eve, 2007, 24 years after the photograph was taken, looking exactly the same age. Catherine Bellamy attended her brother's funeral in Portland on January 4, 2008. She was the only family member present. David had never married, never had children, had spent the last decade of his life working as an accountant for a small firm that sent flowers, but no representatives. Among David's personal effects, Catherine found a letter he had written but never sent. It was dated December 23, 2007, the day before her encounter at the Common Man. The letter was addressed to her. "Dear Catherine," it began, "I have started this letter 100 times over the years and never found the words. What I did was wrong. What I said was unforgivable. But I am asking you to forgive me anyway, because I have learned that forgiveness is the only gift that matters, even when it comes too late. I am driving to New Hampshire tomorrow. I will be there by Christmas. I hope you will see me. I hope you will let me say I'm sorry. Your brother, David." David had left Portland on Christmas morning, heading east on Interstate 84 toward New Hampshire. He had made it less than 100 miles before the storm, the ice, and a moment's inattention sent his car off the road. He had been coming to ask for forgiveness. He had died before he could arrive, but somehow his message had reached Catherine anyway, delivered by a waitress who did not exist, written in handwriting that was not his own, arriving before his death rather than after. "Tell David I forgive him." Catherine Bellamy kept the note from the common man in her wallet for the rest of her life. She never returned to the restaurant. She never spoke publicly about her experience until 2019, when a local historian conducting interviews about unusual events in the region recorded her account. "I don't know who Noel was," Catherine said in that interview. "I don't know how she knew about David, or how she knew what he was going to write in a letter I wouldn't find for another week. I've stopped trying to understand it. All I know is that she gave me something I didn't know I needed. She gave me the chance to forgive my brother before it was too late, even though it was already too late, even though he was already gone." Catherine paused, her voice steady, but her eyes distant. "Forgiveness is the only gift that matters," she said. "That's what she told me. And she was right. I just wish I could thank her for helping me understand that." Catherine Bellamy died on March 15, 2021, at the age of 78. Her daughter found the note from the common man among her personal effects, folded inside a copy of Eike Aiskamstamtansanas, Christmas Carol, with a passage underlined in faded ink. The passage read, "I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year." Beside it, in Catherine's handwriting, was a single word, Noel. Some memories refuse to be documented. Route 3A runs through the heart of Bow, New Hampshire, a two-lane road that connects the state capital of Concord to the smaller communities scattered along the Merrimack River Valley. The road is unremarkable in most respects. Gas stations, convenience stores, the occasional farm stand selling apples or pumpkins in season. In winter, the shoulders accumulate dirty snow pushed aside by plows, and the traffic thins as residents retreat indoors to wait for spring. Bow itself is a town of approximately 8,000 people, close enough to Concord to share its economy, but far enough to maintain its own identity. The town was incorporated in 1727 and has grown slowly over the centuries, its population stable, its character consistent. People who live in Bow tend to stay in Bow. Families measure their tenure in generations rather than years. Change, when it comes gradually, which is why the Christmas tree lot was so unusual, not because it existed. Many farms in the region sold trees during the holiday season, but because no one could remember when it had started. No one knew who owned it. And when it finally closed, no one could prove it had ever been there at all. The lot occupied approximately 2 acres on the eastern side of Route 3A, between the old Congregational Church and a stretch of undeveloped woodland that belonged to the state. A hand-painted sign appeared each year on the first Saturday of December. Christmas trees. Cut your own or pre-cut. Mr. Frost. The sign was always the same, white paint on weathered plywood, the letters slightly uneven in a way that suggested they had been applied by hand rather than stencil. The trees themselves were exceptional. Balsam firs, Fraser firs, blue spruces, varieties that grew readily in New Hampshire but seemed somehow fuller and more fragrant on Mr. Frost's lot than anywhere else. Customers who visited other tree farms before, stopping at Route 3A, invariably chose Mr. Frost's trees, despite prices that were neither particularly high nor particularly low. The trees simply looked better. They smelled better. They felt, according to dozens of accounts collected over the years, more like Christmas. Mr. Frost himself was a man of indeterminate age, somewhere between 50 and 70, depending on who was asked, with a full white beard, weathered skin, and blue eyes that seemed too bright for his face. He wore the same outfit every year: canvas work pants, a red flannel shirt, leather boots, and a wool cap that he never removed regardless of temperature. His voice was deep and unhurried, and he had a habit of knowing things about his customers that they had not told him. Margaret Hollister, who purchased trees from Mr. Frost for 8 consecutive years, described her first encounter in a 2012 interview. "I brought my daughter Emily, who must have been 4 at the time," she said. This was December of '83, our first year in Bow. We didn't know anyone yet. But when Mr. Frost saw us walking through the lot, he smiled at Emily and said, "I have just the tree for a little girl who loves ballet." Emily had just started ballet lessons that fall. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I certainly hadn't mentioned it to a stranger selling Christmas trees. Margaret asked Mr. Frost how he had known. He just shrugged, she recalled. Said something like, "I pay attention to what matters." Then he led us to this perfect little Fraser fir, just Emily's height. And she fell in love with it immediately. We bought it without even looking at anything else. Similar accounts appear throughout the recollections of former customers. Mr. Frost knew that the Henderson family had just adopted a rescue dog, though they had told no one. He knew that the Kimball boy had been accepted to Dartmouth, though the acceptance letter had arrived only that morning. He knew that old Mrs. Beaumont's husband was sick, that the Novak twins were expecting their first grandchild, that the young couple from Massachusetts was planning to move to Bow permanently, all before any of these things had been shared publicly. It wasn't creepy, insisted Thomas Paradis, who visited the lot annually from 1985 to 1994. That's what I keep trying to explain to people. It should have been creepy, this old man knowing your personal business. But it wasn't. It felt like he was just interested, like he genuinely cared about what was happening in our lives, like he wanted to match us with the right tree for that particular Christmas. The right tree for that particular Christmas. This phrase, or variations of it, appears in nearly every account of Mr. Frost's lot. Customers describe being led to specific trees that Mr. Frost had apparently selected for them before they even arrived. The trees were always perfect, the right height, the right shape, the right density of branches for the ornaments each family owned. Parents with young children received trees with soft needles that wouldn't poke small fingers. Families with cats received trees that inexplicably their cats showed no interest in climbing or destroying, and the trees lasted. Helen Archibald, a retired school teacher from Bow, kept detailed journals throughout the 1980s and 90s. Her entries from the Christmas seasons during that period document her experiences with Mr. Frost's trees with characteristic precision. December 15, 1987, purchased 7-foot Fraser fir from Route 3A lot. Mr. Frost recommended it specifically, said it would keep until spring, assumed he was joking. January 15, 1988, tree still full, no needle drop. Other years, tree is bare by January 10th at latest. February 1st, 1988, tree still green. Removed ornaments but cannot bring myself to dispose of it. Smells as averso, fresh as December. March 1st, 1988. Finally took tree to curb, needles still attached, still green, still fragrant. Garbage collectors commented on it. One asked where I'd bought it. I told him Route 3A. He said he'd never noticed a tree lot there. Helen Archibald's experience was not unique. Dozens of families have reported that trees purchased from Mr. Frost remained healthy and green well past the normal lifespan of a cut Christmas tree. Some retained their needles until Easter. Others reportedly stayed fresh until the following Christmas, at which point families finally disposed of them simply because it seemed wrong to reuse a tree for a second year. No scientific explanation has been offered for this longevity. Cut trees, separated from their root systems, typically begin to dry out within weeks regardless of water supply. Mr. Frost's trees, according to all available accounts, did not follow this pattern. The lot closed after the 1994 season. Customers who returned in December 1995 found the 2-acre parcel empty. No sign, no trees, no evidence that any commercial activity had ever occurred there. The grass was undisturbed. The ground showed no tire tracks, no tree stumps, no holes where root balls had been removed. It looked, according to several witnesses, as if nothing had ever been planted or sold on that land. The town of Bow had no record of the lot's existence. This discovery was made by Harold Beaumont, whose late wife had purchased trees from Mr. Frost for a decade. When Harold visited the town clerk's office in January 1995 to inquire about what had happened to the lot, he was told that no business license had ever been issued for a Christmas tree operation on Route 3A. No permits had been filed. No tax returns had been submitted. The clerk searched records going back to 1970 and found nothing. "That's not possible," Harold reportedly told the clerk. "I have receipts. I have photographs. I bought trees there for 10 years. The clerk asked to see the receipts. Harold returned the next day with a shoebox containing every receipt from every tree he had ever purchased from Mr. Frost. The receipts were blank. The paper was there, cream-colored slips with the faint impression of a printed border, but the writing had vanished. Handwritten prices, dates, descriptions of trees purchased, all of it had faded to nothing. Harold then retrieved his photographs. He had taken pictures at the lot on several occasions, mostly of his children posing with trees they had just selected. The photographs were still in his albums, still in their original positions, but the images themselves had degraded. The lot was visible only as a vague blur of green and white. Mr. Frost, who appeared in 2 of the photographs, was unrecognizable, a smear of red and gray where a person should have been. Only the Beaumont children remained clear, their faces sharp and detailed against a background that no longer existed. Harold Beaumont was not the only one to discover this phenomenon. Throughout the winter and spring of 1995, families across Bow reported that their photographs of Mr. Frost's lot had degraded in identical fashion. Receipts had gone blank. Notes about prices and tree varieties had faded from journals. Video footage taken by one family on a camcorder in 1992 showed only static where the lot should have appeared, though the rest of the tape played normally. "It was like the lot was erasing itself," said Margaret Hollister, "like it had only been real for as long as it needed to be, and now it was undoing the evidence." The land where the lot had stood was traced to the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, which had acquired it in 1961 as part of a highway expansion project that never materialized. According to state records, the parcel had been designated as protected, right-of-way, and was permanently restricted from commercial development. No easement had ever been granted. No lease had ever been issued. The state had no record of anyone named Mr. Frost. Attempts to identify the man through other means proved equally fruitless. He had no driver's license in New Hampshire or any neighboring state. No social security number matched his description. Postal records showed no mail deliveries to the Route 3A location. Utility companies had no accounts in his name. He had left no paper trail whatsoever. Not in Bow, not in New Hampshire, not anywhere. By 2000, most residents of Bow had stopped discussing the tree lot. The memory remained vivid for those who had visited it, but the absence of physical evidence made the stories difficult to share with newcomers. How do you explain a business that operated for 13 years without ever legally existing? How do you describe a man who knew your secrets and sold you trees that never died? Some families still have their final trees from Mr. Frost, dried now, needles long since fallen, but kept in attics or basements as proof that something real had happened. These trees, when tested by a botanist from the University of New Hampshire in 2008, showed no unusual properties. They were ordinary Fraser firs, ordinary balsams, ordinary spruces. Whatever had made them remarkable had faded along with everything else. The parcel on Route 3A remains empty. The state has not developed it, has not sold it, has not done anything with it at all. Grass grows there in summer. Snow covers it in winter. Occasionally, a motorist will pull over, remembering something they cannot quite articulate, and stand at the edge of the road looking at a field where nothing grows but ordinary weeds. In December 2019, a child named Oliver Marsh was riding in the back seat of his parents' car on Route 3A when he pointed at the empty parcel and asked a question. "Can we stop at the Christmas tree place?" His mother, driving, glanced at the field. She saw nothing but dead grass and snow. "What Christmas tree place, sweetheart?" "The one with the old man," Oliver said. "The one with the red shirt. He's waving at us." Oliver's mother pulled over. She looked at the field. She saw no one. "There's no one there, honey," she said. "It's just an empty lot." Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He says his name is Mr. Frost. He says he has the perfect tree for a little boy who just got a new baby sister." Oliver's mother had not told anyone about her pregnancy. The test had been positive only that morning. She had not even told her husband yet. She drove away without stopping. When she returned to the spot 3 days later, alone, the field was empty. No sign, no trees, no old man in a red flannel shirt. But pressed into the snow at the edge of the road, clearly visible in the December afternoon light, was a single set of boot prints. They led from the shoulder of Route 3A to the center of the field. They did not lead back. Some signals carry messages from places that time has forgotten. Mount Washington stands at 6,288 feet, the highest peak in the northeastern United States and home to some of the most extreme weather conditions ever recorded on Earth. The Summit Observatory has documented wind speeds exceeding 230 miles per hour, temperatures plunging to nearly 50 degrees below zero, and ice accumulations that transform the research station into a frozen fortress for months at a time. The mountain kills with regularity over 160 people since 1849, and does so without malice or warning, its weather changing from clear skies to whiteout conditions in minutes. The Mount Washington Observatory has operated continuously since 1932, staffed year-round by meteorologists, researchers, and support personnel who live in the summit building for week-long shifts. The observatory's mission is scientific, collecting weather data, conducting atmospheric research, and maintaining instrumentation that contributes to forecasts across New England. But the staff also serves an informal role as guardians of the mountain, monitoring conditions, advising climbers, and occasionally participating in rescue operations when the weather allows. The observatory maintains multiple communication systems: satellite uplinks, internet connections, VHF radios for coordination with search and rescue teams. Among these systems is a shortwave radio receiver, a legacy technology maintained partly for redundancy and partly for tradition. Shortwave signals can travel vast distances by bouncing off the ionosphere, making them useful for emergency communication when other systems fail. The observatory monitors several frequencies as a matter of routine. On the night of December 24th into December 25th, 2016, meteorologist Rebecca Stanhope was on overnight duty at the summit. The conditions outside were severe, but not unusual for late December. Winds gusting to 80 miles per hour, temperatures around -20, visibility near zero due to blowing snow. Rebecca was monitoring instruments and completing routine logs when the shortwave receiver activated at 3:33 in the morning. The transmission lasted approximately 47 seconds. Rebecca described the voice as male, calm, and unhurried, speaking English with no discernible accent. The audio quality was poor, heavy static, fading in and out, but the words were clear enough to transcribe. She wrote them down as she heard them, a habit developed over years of working in environments where documentation matters. The voice recited 7 names: Harold Fitch, Margaret Colson, David Urbanek, Anna Marie Belanger, Thomas Running Bear, Catherine Ogilvy, James Whitmore. After the names, the voice provided a series of numbers that Rebecca recognized as GPS coordinates: 44 degrees, 16 minutes north, 71 degrees, 19 minutes west. Then the voice spoke its final phrase. We waited as long as we could. They said help was coming. Help never came. The transmission ended. Static resumed. Rebecca attempted to reply on the same frequency, identifying herself as Mount Washington Observatory and requesting clarification. There was no response. She tried 3 more times over the following hour. Nothing. Rebecca logged the transmission and reported it to the observatory director the following morning. She also plotted the GPS coordinates on a topographical map. They pointed to a location in the Great Gulf Wilderness, approximately 3 miles northeast of the summit, a remote glacial cirque that is among the most difficult terrain in the White Mountains to access, particularly in winter. The Great Gulf is a massive ravine carved by ancient glaciers, its walls rising over 1,000 feet and its floor littered with boulders, ice, and the accumulated debris of countless rockfalls. Even in summer, the area sees relatively few visitors. In winter, it is essentially inaccessible, except to the most experienced mountaineers. The director, a man named William Arsenault, reviewed Rebecca's log and listened to the recording she had made of the transmission. The audio was degraded but audible. The names, the coordinates, the final message, all were present, exactly as Rebecca had transcribed. William contacted the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, which coordinates search and rescue operations in the White Mountains. He explained what had been received and provided the coordinates. The department's response was cautious but professional. They would investigate when conditions allowed, but no rescue operation could be mounted in current weather. 3 days later, on December 28th, a fish and game conservation officer named Paul Marquise led a team into the Great Gulf to investigate the coordinates. The weather had improved. Marginally, winds reduced to 40 miles per hour, temperatures around 0. But the terrain remained treacherous. The team reached the specified location after 6 hours of difficult travel. They found nothing, no signs of human presence, no equipment, no remains, no indication that anyone had ever been at those coordinates. Paul Marquis documented the search in his official report, noting that the area showed no evidence of recent or historical human activity beyond standard wilderness conditions. The case was classified as an unfounded report and closed in January 2017. Rebecca Stanhope left the Mount Washington Observatory in 2018 to take a position at a weather station in Alaska. Before leaving, she gave an interview to a journalist researching unexplained radio phenomena in remote locations. Her account of the transmission was detailed and consistent with her original log. "I've worked in radio communication for 15 years," she said. "I know what interference sounds like. I know what crossed signals sound like. This wasn't either of those things. Someone was transmitting deliberately, on a frequency they knew we monitored, at a time when they knew someone would be listening, and they wanted us to hear those names." The journalist asked if Rebecca had researched the names. "I tried," she said. "Harold Fitch, Margaret Colson, the others. I searched newspaper archives, missing persons databases, climbing club records. I found nothing. No one by those names has been reported missing on Mount Washington or anywhere in the White Mountains as far as I can determine." She paused. "But here's what bothers me. The coordinates were precise. Whoever sent that transmission knew exactly where they wanted us to look, and when Paul Marquis and his team went there, they found nothing. But they only searched the surface. The Great Gulf has caves, crevices, places where things could be hidden for decades. And it was December. Half the ravine was buried under snow and ice. Rebecca's observation would prove more significant than she could have known. In January 2019, a climbing party from the Appalachian Mountain Club was conducting a winter traverse of the Presidential Range when weather forced them to descend into the Great Gulf for shelter. The party, 3 experienced mountaineers named Eileen Bradshaw, Marcus Finnegan, and Yolanda Torres, took refuge in a shallow overhang approximately 200 yards from the coordinates specified in the 2016 transmission. While waiting for conditions to improve, Marcus Finnegan noticed something protruding from a crack in the rock wall, a piece of leather frozen and weathered that appeared to be the corner of a book binding. The climbers carefully extracted the object. It was a journal, a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle, but largely intact. The first entry was dated December 19, 1931. The final entry was dated December 25th of the same year. The journal belonged to a man named Harold Fitch. Over the following 2 hours, as the storm continued outside, the climbing party discovered 6 additional journals, hidden in cracks and crevices within the overhang. Each journal bore a different name: Margaret Colson, David Urbanek, Anna Marie Belanger, Thomas Running Bear, Catherine Ogilvie, and James Whitmore. The 7 names from the transmission. The journals spanned 56 years. Harold Fitch's was the oldest, dated 1931. James Whitmore's was the most recent, dated 1987. The entries described climbing expeditions, weather conditions, personal reflections, the ordinary contents of mountaineering journals. But each journal ended on the same date, December 25th, and each journal ended with the same final entry. They said help was coming. Help never came. The same words from the transmission. The climbing party reported their discovery to the Mount Washington Observatory and the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. The journals were collected and transferred to the State Police Forensic Laboratory in Concord for analysis. The results, delivered in April 2019, confirmed that the journals were genuine artifacts. Paper analysis dated Harold Fitch's journal to the early 1930s. Ink composition in James Whitmore's journal was consistent with ballpoint pens manufactured in the 1980s. Handwriting analysis suggested 7 different authors, each with characteristics appropriate to their documented time periods. But historical research revealed something troubling. None of the 7 individuals had ever been reported missing. No climbing permits, no trail registrations, no emergency contacts, no family members filing inquiries. Harold Fitch did not appear in any census after 1930. Margaret Colson had no death certificate, no burial record, no Social Security Death Index entry. The 7 people whose journals were found in the Great Gulf had simply ceased to exist, without anyone noticing or caring enough to report their absence. It was as if they had never existed at all, except for the journals they left behind. The state police investigation was suspended in June 2019 due to insufficient evidence of criminal activity. The journals were transferred to the New Hampshire Historical Society, where they remain available for research but have attracted little scholarly attention. Rebecca Stanhope, contacted in Alaska after the discovery, offered one final observation. The transmission came in 2016, she said. The most recent journal is from 1987. That's a gap of 29 years. And the transmission mentioned all 7 names, including Harold Fitch, who disappeared in 1931, 85 years before I heard his name on that radio. She let the implications settle. Someone, or something, knew those names, knew the coordinates, knew the journals were there. And they waited until 2016 to tell us. Why? Why then? Why not earlier? And who was transmitting if all 7 of them have been dead for decades? The questions remain unanswered. The Mount Washington Observatory continues to monitor shortwave frequencies as part of its routine operations. No similar transmissions have been received since December 2016. The Great Gulf Wilderness remains open to climbers, though winter access continues to be discouraged due to extreme conditions. The overhang where the journals were found has not been formally investigated beyond the initial recovery. The state lacks funding for such expeditions, and no academic institution has expressed interest in further exploration. But there is one detail that appears in the official recovery report, a detail that the climbing party mentioned only briefly and that has received no follow-up investigation. When Marcus Finnegan extracted the first journal from the crack in the rock wall, he noticed something carved into the stone behind it. The carving was crude but legible, scratched with what appeared to be a knife or sharp rock. It read, "7 came, 7 stayed, 7 wait." Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a date, December 25th, 2031, 14 years from now. The Great Gulf is silent. The journals sit in their archive boxes. The transmission has not repeated. And somewhere on Mount Washington, in a frequency range that humans rarely monitor, someone may still be waiting to send another message. Waiting for help that never comes. Waiting for someone to finally listen.